Hello, good evening, everyone. I call the Tuesday, August 18th, 2026 Peninsula School District Board of Directors meeting to order. All board directors are present. Please note that this regular scheduled meeting is held to conduct district business. It is open to the public and it is being recorded. So now if you would all please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Behind you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Item 2 this evening is our agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Is there a second? It's been moved by David and seconded by Matt to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried and the agenda is approved. Okay, item 3 is our comments from the public. So the school board offers one public comment period. Community members may comment on board agenda items before board action is taken and non-agenda topics. So speakers will have 3 minutes. When I call your name, please come to the podium. And you'll see a timer behind you. If for some reason you can't get through your comments in 3 minutes, I will cut you off, but you're always willing or always able to email them to the board as well. So first speaker this evening is Anya Helgerson.
Good evening, members of the board and superintendent. My name is Anya Helgerson, and I'm an incoming senior at Peninsula High School. Throughout my time at Peninsula, I have intentionally taken the most challenging courses available to prepare for my dream of studying aerospace engineering. And I'm also verbally committed to play collegiate lacrosse at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Throughout this process, I have learned that the University of Alabama system uses the exact GPA reported on high school transcripts to calculate merit scholarships. When I spoke with my admissions counselor, she confirmed that if Peninsula provided a weighted GPA addendum, I would receive an additional $12,000 in scholarship funding. When I asked if our district could provide me with this document, I was told that no such option exists and that colleges are expected to recalculate GPA. Except in my situation, it is obvious that all universities do not do this. This issue is bigger than just me. Every year, Peninsula students take on AP, honors, and college-level coursework because we are told to push ourselves. Yet, because Washington State limits weighted GPAs on standard transcripts, our students are at a distinct disadvantage when competing nationally for admissions, service academy appointments, and scholarship funding. Other Washington districts, including Spokane, already utilize existing state law flexibility to offer weighted GPA transcript addendum. They have found a way to support their students, and Peninsula can do the same. I'm asking the board and superintendent to adopt a policy allowing students to request a weighted GPA transcript addendum starting in the 2026-2027 school year. I have submitted research and real examples from other in-state districts showing how easily this can be implemented. Colleges cannot evaluate information they never received. Let's ensure Peninsula students get full credit for the rigorous work they accomplish. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and welcome back from the Coast Guard Academy. Sounds like an exciting summer. So next time, we'd love for you to come up and tell us about that. Okay, and next is Truly. Is it Truly or Trudy? Truly Helgerson.
Thank you for your time.
Go ahead.
Should I just start? Okay. I originally was just gonna share how easy it was to get my oldest daughter's weighted transcript from the District of Spokane on their website. It says contact the secretary. I left a voice message. I had her student ID. I received an email a couple of days later with her transcript, and then there was a weighted transcript addendum. But then I saw that our older son, who graduated from Peninsula in 2023, sent a letter to the board, and we were CC'd on it about an hour ago. So I just want to read a little bit about that. He was sending his experience to support Anya's efforts for Peninsula students to have access to their weighted transcript addendums. And so I'll just read a little bit about that. He had been applying to outside scholarships, which were extremely important for his attendance in college. He had battled leukemia for 3 years in high school, which significantly impacted his ability to compete for merit scholarships. He purposely took a few AP classes his last year of high school just to hopefully raise his GPA. His aim and goals were much different than Anya's. But luckily, his university at Mercyhurst, they recalculated his GPA for him. But he was aware that there was a private scholarship that responded back to him and instructed him to submit his transcript with his weighted GPA rather than self-reporting it. He did not have time to follow up with this process with his counselor. He now knows from spending the summer at home and Anya's research that this would not have been an option anyway. He says that even if I had been able to follow up with my counselor, they would not have been able to provide me with any school documentation showing my weighted GPA. And he goes on to ponder how many other students are impacted by this without really realizing it. And that one relatively simple change could have a meaningful financial impact by helping students qualify for scholarships and merit aid based on the rigorous academic work that they have already completed. And that he also states the potential economic impact of this is significant. A missed scholarship is not just a missed line on an application, but it can mean thousands of dollars for each family and student. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, and that concludes public comment for the evening. We'll move on to our item 4, which is recognition and reports. So we have first the monthly budget update from
Okay, so the first one that we're going to be going through is just going to be our June 2026 monthly board report showing where we are trending for the end of the 25-26 school year. So that pink semicircle is currently showing that we have collected approximately 76.9-ish% of our projected year-to-date revenues. That is approximately 3% under where we had anticipated to be at this time. And then we have local sources are currently in at about 94%, which is about 4% under what we had anticipated it to be at this time. A good chunk of that 4% reduction isn't actually local levy collection. It's like fees or food service revenues that would be coming through the schools. So we budget a certain value each year for, let's say, donations that go through school level donation accounts, or a certain amount on what we think we're going to be bringing in for food service paid meal options for that day. So that decrease of approximately 4%, that's the side it's coming from, not from local levy. State sources actual year to date, we're currently within 0.1% of where we had anticipated to be, so right on budget. And federal sources actual year to date, we are approximately 1% under where we had anticipated to be at this time. But during, Chris just did budget our grant claims for the feds here on the 15th. And so we are going to see that semicircle here come to a close within the next 2 months. Federal claims we also get to continue claiming in September and October for the 25-26 school year. Because we're a modified accrual district, we accrue those revenues when we get them back into the year in which they were earned, which is the 25-26 school year. So you'll continue to see us draw down those figures here over the course of the next few months. These are some of the other charts available showing our top 10 revenue sources. As you can see, apportionment, so state revenues coming in at number 1, and then local property tax number 2. The other graphs you're seeing trends those values across this current year and the prior 3 years as well. So you can see those that incremental growth as we go along with our revenues. Okay, so this is our expenditure trends. That green semicircle is where we would be trending to end as far as ending fund balance for year end at 6.37%. This number fluctuates significantly over the course of the next 3 months because of year end journal entries, booking revenues back to the month and fiscal year in which those revenues were earned, or moving expenditures between fiscal years dependent upon when items were received or when services were provided. We have to account for those in those specific fiscal years depending upon how those questions end up being answered. The total expenditures actual year to date were currently approximately 3% under where we had budgeted to be at that time period. When you start seeing, revenues decreasing and such, you make sure that your expenditures are also decreasing at this point, so you're not spending budgeted money that doesn't have a revenue offset. And so that is something that we look at as the year progresses. Salaries and benefits is approximately 2% under where we had budgeted. We did recoup some salary and benefit costs throughout the year. We had some attrition in non-certificated, non-contracted positions. And when that comes up, when we're looking at the budget, especially when it's a mid-year change, we really scrutinize whether or not the position needs to be backfilled or can sit vacant either until the next fiscal year, or whether or not we're reorganizing and no longer are in need of the position. So we had both of those scenarios occur over the course of this year. Basic education actual year to date, we're currently trending about 7% under. Again, so when we're talking basic education, it can be anything from classroom teacher salaries, benefits, supplies in the classroom, to utilities to run a building, administrative costs. It's everything that's grouped in under program 01 funnels into this area. So it's a significant amount of costs that are commingled and put in there. So by showing that we're under budget for basic education, this does not mean that we've shorted costs for educating our students. It could be something as much as we budgeted for utilities to come in at $4 million and they came in at 3.8. Okay, same thing as the revenue slide. This shows our top 10 expenditure sides. First one obviously being basic education, special education coming up number 2, district-wide support. So that's pretty much everything overhead. In our 26-27 budget presentation, we're going to get a little bit more into specifics in regards to what district-wide support actually amounts to. But that can be anything from liability insurance, running transportation, utilities, all of those pieces. You're going to see the same 3 graphs with the trend for expenditures for both current year against the 3 prior years as well in those other 3. This is our slide trending ending fund balance. So the solid blue is current year. You can see we're sort of spot on with where we were at this time last year. Okay, so last year is that red dotted line. And so you can see in the month of June, we were ending with a fund balance of approximately $6 million, just over $6 million. And then you can see in all prior years how you spike up in the month of July and August. That's because 23.5% of our general apportionment is actually received during July and August when students actually are not in class. But July and August matches the state's next fiscal year calendar, so they're able to offset some of their costs by deferring payment on that until their next budgetary year. Okay, so this is a little bit more of a deeper dive showing both the very first set of that chart is prior year and where we were at this time versus current year and where we are. Now, if you can remember back to that fund balance graph, and I showed you pretty much we're spot on where we were last year at June. If you start looking at these, you can see the similarities. So we are at a deficit spending, which just means that we've spent more than what we've brought in for revenues. We knew this, it was budgeted, it's not a surprise. And so we're currently at about $9.7 million prior to any type of transfer in for deficit spending, which is where we had been at this time last year as well. With the transfer in of safety, security, and technology dollars from Capital Projects Fund to offset the costs that do not meet the capitalization threshold of the Capital Projects Fund, it brings the deficit spending down to approximately just under $7.5 million. Again, this is still trending to be a solid place as far as ending fund balance. We budgeted to be just over 4% at the end of this year. Right now, we're trending to be at 6%, okay? So we have some wiggle room right there. And then this last piece is going to take this information and it's going to trend it out. Revenues by source for prior year to date versus current year to date, and also doing the same by object. So that's where you're seeing your certificated salaries, classified salaries, and benefits. So that's June. We still have July and August to report on in upcoming months, but are there any questions about 25-26 budget status year to date?
Just if you could just go over that SS&T transfer again
Yep.
and what it's for and why we do
Yeah.
that.
So in 2023, our community passed technically it's considered a capital projects levy to offset costs for safety, security, and technology. Now, the way fund accounting works, so the school district has 5 different funds. We're going to be going through those in more detail during the 26-27 budget presentation. But when we bring in capital funds, those funds via the levy need to hit the capital projects fund. Now, a capital projects fund has a capitalization threshold, meaning expenses can only be coded to the capital projects fund when the individual value amount of an item is in excess of $5,000. If it's not in excess individually at $5,000, then the cost has to first come out of the general fund, and then you do the transfer from the capital projects fund into the general fund to offset the value of what was purchased. This also amounts for salaries per se. So you can't code or pay salaries of individuals in a capital projects fund or anything like that. When we have SSOs, all of that, these are all general fund positions. And so what districts do is they do sort of a cost share or an offset. And so, okay, general fund's going to pick up the cost of the safety and security officers. And then in turn, the safety, security, and technology levy is going to pick up the cost of MacBooks, MacBook Neos, for example. MacBook Neos on an individual basis were under the capitalization threshold, so need to be coded to the general fund. But the cost associated with that is coming from the capital projects fund. And so therefore we do the transfer and we build those transfers into the budget. Yep. Any other questions about this? Okay.
You're just going to hang there for a second? Okay, We're going to move on to item 5. So item 5 on our agenda, this is the budget for our 2026-2027 school year. This is all funds, and it is a public hearing. So I will now call the public hearing to order. The purpose of tonight's public hearing is to present and discuss a proposed preliminary 2026-2027 budget for the Peninsula School District. This is an important matter as budget decisions impact our students, schools, staff, and community. The Board of Directors welcomes public input as part of the process, and our Chief Financial Officer, Chief of Finance and Operations, Ashley Murphy, and Director of Finance and Business, Chris Bishop, along with Logan Toms, incoming, junior at UW now? Sophomore, you've only been 1 year. Okay, is here to present. So item 5.1 is the preliminary 2026-2027 budget for all funds presentation.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Natalie. As you said, Logan, I'm sure some of you guys recognize his face. He could not stay away, so for the 3rd time, he is back with us and got his fingers in budget development this year once again. And so in all reality, I'm going to have Chris and Logan sort of leading the presentation, and I'm going to be providing more in-depth information as we go along, more from a legislative rulemaking standpoint, and sort of calling out some of the pieces that we've heard over the course of this last year that we really wanted to address proactively through the budgeting process to show really where the revenues are coming in and expenditures are going out. So keep in mind that as we go through this, there's going to be specific slides that if something came to the board previously as a concern or where do we get money for XYZ, we proactively built information into this slide deck. Now, that's not saying that there wasn't funding for areas previously, just kind of specific pulled out. So we're being proactive, transparent this time by just making sure that we've called out specific funding pieces as we go along. So I'm going to turn it over. Chris, you're going to go ahead and get us started and we'll go from there. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so first, just to introduce the general fund. The general fund is where the day-to-day operations in schools happen. It's your classroom instruction, your instructional support, your district-wide operations such as transportation, food services, grounds, maintenance, custodial. There's also categorical programs such as LAP and Title mixed in there, community use, athletics and extracurricular, and administration. That's just the high level. There's intricacies built in there, but just to introduce you to what occurs in the general fund versus the other four funds that Ashley mentioned. Now we're going to jump into projected enrollment. I'm going to let Logan take this slide.
Just want to thank everyone for being here. It's a pretty packed crowd tonight for this very fun event. So this is going to be our general fund funded enrollment. What's really important before we get into any of the specific numbers is that this represents the FTE or full-time equivalent. So that's basically one student in one seat for 6 or 7 periods of the day for for the 180 school days. So this isn't, specifically the amount of people, it's their equivalent attendance and enrollment in our schools. Starting at the top, we have our transition to kindergarten program. This is a program for kids that are younger than the age that would normally enter kindergarten. It allows us to do more outreach, see where kindergartners are at, and as I'm sure Ashley will mention, it does improve educational outcomes for the kids that go through this program. And it runs for roughly the school year, but a bit less. It starts a bit later and a bit earlier. This was a big levy priority for our district, which is why you see the dramatic increase from the 25-26 budget to the 26-27 budget, specifically from 108 to 180. And this is represented by us expanding transition to kindergarten from the original 6 schools to the entire 10 elementary schools across the district, making sure that everyone has access for that. And it's the 18-person classroom in each of the 10 elementary schools.
One of the items that we're really excited about with this is that this student population is going to school in the same support that they're going. So previously, we only had it at 6 schools. We have to bus kids, sometimes not from their home school area, into one of the schools with PK. In this situation, those 18 students, that class, they're going to get to go to school with their peers that they're going to on the playground when they hit the kindergarten, when they hit the kindergarten. So we're really excited for that. Then in addition to that, I did check on our enrollment in the program. We're basically all the way up through today. We have 150 students actively enrolled. With that 150 students, we have dozens that are sitting on a wait list, waiting for September 2nd, next set of screening and testing to occur. And so this program, we will likely start it. It starts in October. It will start in October and still likely have a wait list. So the demand within this community is high for this program. Going out there with this push for 10 sections, 1 in each school, it was a big lift. But based upon the overwhelming early support of getting students registered in June through the first screening timeframe, shows just the need for within the community. So far, schools are looking solid. We do have a few schools so far that have already waitlisted their and so once we get to that waitlist area, students, because there's still requirements on and technically it's meant for students who have not had any formal preschool or anything like that. So this is going to be their first opportunity to sort of learn some of those skills settings amongst some other. So they're rank ordered and then they're placed. So ultimately, if the school has already filled their section for the upcoming year, but that student still ranked higher than some other students on the wait list, they're going to get a call to see if they want placement in one of our other schools as well. But as of right now, that's a good problem to have a lot of students and families that are eagerly awaiting to start the program.
Awesome. And a prior slide.
Yeah.
And you'll.
Oh.
What?
Yeah, he did. No,
Okay.
switch the slide.
Sorry. Oh, I apologize. You'll notice the asterisk by that. That just means that those numbers aren't included in the subtotals as per just general state guidelines.
I would do it side by side, to be completely honest, guys. There's 30 slides that we're going through. And so just to make sure that we're all on the same page at the same time, throw your questions over whenever you have.
This is just really brief. Why is that TK screening not until September 2nd? What determines when it has to be?
So the first set, there's the first set out. So our are the ones that the screening and testing, all of that. So those that first cohort of already went through that. Then we have our child find staff who actually continue that child process and continue to refer kids. Then that information is collected and pulled and then distributed out to the building for that next set of that are coming in. So I was talking to Lisa Ray earlier, and so that set to start again on September 2nd. Again, school for this group doesn't start until October, so that September time period will be used to go through that second. Yeah, exactly.
I have a question. For the 10 TK programs, if a school is full and there's an open at another, we're going to try and fill them with the kids from the wait list if the parents are willing to move them, send them to a different school if it's not too far away, right? Is there a possibility to our staff to make, is it full because we don't have an extra teacher to teach those extra kids? Is that why it's full?
Yes, but also because sort of why you guys are going to later on regarding legislative impact of the program and overall funding.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
my
so
next
we'll get
question.
more info.
That was going to be my next question, so I'll wait. Thank you.
Yep, I thought of
Okay, thank you.
that.
Awesome. Well, moving on, we have our.
Yeah.
We're only on TK, Chris. Yeah, so moving down, we have our kindergarten. So we budgeted 560 last year. We actually went over that in our annual average, which is what we're actually funded on. Basically, once a month from the start of the year, the state picks a day for us to pull our attendance that day, and that is averaged in a rolling average across the year, and that is the number that we're actually being funded on past the true-up, which is past January. So for the 26-27 year, we're budgeting 567 kindergartners just to stay conservative, and that puts us at a decrease of 14 for our grades 1 through 5. Last year we budgeted 3,094. We had a higher annual average at 3,168, and then we are budgeting a decrease of 62, which is important to note for all these grades 1 through 12 is how we're actually getting these numbers is we're doing a conservative roll up, basically first grade to second grade to third grade to fourth grade. So these aren't just, random guesses that we're throwing out, hoping that we get it right. For grades 6 through 8, we budgeted 2,131 last year. That came in under expectations on the annual average at 2,123. And this year we are budgeting a decrease of 19 at 2,104 for grades 9 through 12, our high schoolers. Last year we budgeted 2,423, when in reality we had 2,419, and next year we are budgeting an increase of 72 to 2,491.
So one of the things to note with this is both in Washington State and nationally, there is simply declining birth. That is just one of the things that we are going to be dealing with as we continue to trend enrollment. One of the positive things that we have going for us, that certain figure budgeted at 5, conservative, came in at 5. For me to talk with my peers, that current cohort, guys, that's how you know whether or not your elementary cohort going through means and what eventually going to what's eventually going to high school. That will trend out for you on what you're going to be looking at. So to see us already 21 above budget during that time period is solid. Still want to be conservative. I have the ability to look at and for kindergarten. One of the things that we were looking at yesterday when we were looking at kindergarten specific is we are already, this is mid-August, we are already within budget for kindergarten. Okay? Last year at this time, I was about 120 off from budget by mid-August. Okay, so we're already 30 within budget, and we still have, two and a half weeks until start, and so we are looking solid for start. PK is also going to be a good predictor for our kindergarten cohort as we move through, because parents are we are seeing area based on the number of individuals that are signing their kids up and so right now we're trying to be positive on that side. But one of the things that we will find as we move along is there are simply less. Okay, so although our overall particularly in elementary isn't projected significant, we likely will see it. And what we're seeing it in this district is in pockets. And it's not in the areas that you would think that you would see, right? We're seeing decreases at Discovery. We're seeing decreases, significant decreases at Voyager. We're seeing decreases at Minor. So there's these pockets in different areas of the district that we're seeing large or other. And so that's something that we look at and track to the point of, okay, where's the enrollment going? If we're seeing is, let's say, in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, but they were with us in the beginning, did they leave? Did they go to another district? What was the rationale behind that, so that we know how to plan in the future? So that is something that we're seeing. Conversely, though, what we are seeing for this district that you would not, given the current demographic moment, is increase in high school. Yes, that's why. Yes, we have some. Our homeschool numbers recovered, I would say, as much as they're going to recover, aside from the new program that we're bringing out, the Homeschool Parent Partnership, here about years ago. And so what we're finding is that this district is offering really innovative programs that other school districts simply are not able to do right now because of the cost of operating the program. And so what we're finding is that parents are now really saying, I want my kid in security, I want my kid in aviation, I want my kid to actually have solid besides ceramics, those types of things. And they're wanting to place their kids in our program at the high school level. One of the other things that we're doing really well here is advanced placement and college classes, of course, the mold of those offers that we have at the high school level is countering what our neighboring are able to offer at this point. And so if you're looking for have a really vigorous course load, be able to graduate, with dozens of credits, we're walk the high school to obtain that type of course load in order that they are secondary education. So yes, we're seeing a drop in elementary. We're seeing the increase in high school. And so our overall net impact then isn't showing as large an impact. And keep in mind, it is conservative. I will never, and my peers got the health, but it's probably with last year, I will never artificially inflate enrollment over what I absolutely know is the bottom line figure. Because when you do that, the state starts funding you at that artificial number. And if you don't come in at that number in September, you already know the entire budget is shot for that entire year. So we super conservative. What we do with this district, our admins love it. They would never tell you. They love it. We do first 5-day count. So after the day, for the first 5 days of year, all of our administrators together and building by building as we go through, hey, where do you start number in by class? First number by class. Attendance, not enrollment. We need to see the kids in. And we go all every level, based high school, and we start looking at class. You know, where did students end up showing up? Let's say registered, they're actually over here. Then the students that we had the prior year, let's say they didn't show up on the first day of school. That office now has a list. They're making phone calls. Hey, first day of school, are you going to be here? A lot of times, and I'm there, but they're proactive about making those connections to the parents. So we do that every single day for those first 5 days. Now, during that, one of that sort of here, but it's the fiscal and financial responsibility is if enrollment not where it was budgeted, what had some involuntary at that time period to get our staff where our so okay, so staff compensated in order to that shift from one classroom to the other, follow our collective bargaining agreement to make sure that we're abiding by the process of the district. When it comes to that, and only do it if applicable. But when it's not that type of process, what happens over that and study more at the end of every because over staff until to deal with an over when the district has was in order to basically take it out. So we do that shift in the first 5 days, and then from there, our staffing has been screwed up. It's about that right sizing aspect that we talked about several times. So that is something that we take into account as we are going.
Boundary line revisions?
No, not boundary line revisions, although we're going to talk about boundary line. That stuff based upon new attendance, like enrollment or whatever. Sometimes, like when you look at roll up, if I had fourth graders in school, my expectation is that I'm going to have 45th graders, and that's the following year. Some are left, some new ones. It's going to approximate that. Now, let's say you had 44th graders, and the next year you only have 20. One, you need to find out why. So staff look at that, but then I can't have 25th of a class size of 10. In the past, what this had is they hire staff class size of 10. Stop that, and now deal with staff as staff, right? And dealing.
Two things real quick. One, I've been notified by a member of the public that when you don't speak into the mic, it's very hard to hear on the stream.
Okay, so you can't hear me from here?
I can,
Okay.
but
Note them.
the YouTube or wherever
Okay.
it's streaming can't. Second is you mentioned people choicing in for high school. Roughly what percentage is that? And is that percentage going up and down? Like are a more proportionate, larger portion of kids coming in, or is it always say 10% every year? It's just growing.
It's been fairly consistent. The only year that I'm seeing a potential increase is actually this year. So I'm waiting to see if those kids actually show in our first 5 day counts to determine where we're actually going to be sitting at. I accounted for it in these projections based upon that. One of the other things that is impacting high school right now is running start. So you can see where we budgeted our running start to be at 328, what our annual average ended up coming in at. That ends up being a negative number for district allocation purposes because we pass through that funding directly to the community college. So when we see increases in running start, then at that point, we need to make sure that we have increased it appropriately for the following year so that we're not dealing with that shortage. So running start and that choice transfer piece is what we're seeing now. When we do our November, we do it in November or December, our board report in regards to year end, that's one of the things that we're going to talk about is enrollment, both for where we were fully ended this year, all the reports are finalized, and what we are looking at for this upcoming school year, and information regarding choice transfers will be in that at those levels.
I want to add something real quick. So Ashley kind of alluded to this, but the involuntary transfers, something that helps us combat is the inequality in class sizes at the different elementary schools. Really, is where we see the biggest impact. So we don't have second grade class sizes of 12 at one elementary and then second grade class sizes of 18 at another. We want to try to even that out across the entire district, and that process helped us do that.
Awesome. So that all brings us to our subtotals for the year. You'll see that we are actually budgeting an increase of 60 from 8,208 to 8,268. And from our annual average the prior year, just being conservative, we are projecting a decrease of 24 FTE. Now, under the K-12 subtotals directly, we have our running start, which our annual average last year was 343. We are budgeting 379 for that, in part due to larger incoming 11th and 12th grade classes compared to last year, and just making sure that we're staying conservative at all times. For our Open Doors program, which is for people aged 16 to 21 who either essentially dropped out of high school or were extremely credit deficient or were otherwise unable to complete their diploma. This is a program that we do that allows them to finish their diploma instead of doing a GED through a community college. This is a pass-through program. And we are budgeting, we budgeted 32 last year, we're budgeting 32 this year, and we had an annual average of 21 the prior year. And
As you imagine, number fluctuates great. They are when they were credit deficient by 1 credit, so they're in and out in 2 months. Other individuals are younger, who are dropped out. They get them. It's an in and out, and so it's don't.
yeah, and at the bottom there, you'll see our alternative learning experience. Our annual average last year was 109, and our budget for this upcoming year is 125. And in all reality, this is just our Henderson Bay program for our 9th through 12th graders. And if you're quite number savvy and maybe have been adding through the numbers, the ALE numbers aren't added to the subtotals to make the total K-12 enrollment because they're already included in the grades 9 through 12 category. That's just a cutout we have because it's we get slightly enhanced funding for our ALE program. So with that, we have our total K-12 enrollment being at budgeted 8,679, an increase from 8,656 from our annual average.
Okay, so you guys, this number looks like one thing. Now we're going to go on to another slide, and what you're going to see is that we're comparing subtotals because those are our fully funded FTE. And so, yes, we could sit here and talk about the 8,679 projected budgeted, but of those, the running start, the 379, we're going to receive, some, 7% funding for 100% funding for ALEs, approximately the same. And so, and fresh start, you're not getting anything. So ultimately, when we're looking at this, we want to look apples to apples and see what is our fully funded student population looking at year over year. So next slide.
Awesome. So 30 more. Okay. So for our enrollment graph, this is basically all our actual data from the past few decades and comparing it to our 26-27 budget on the right. So there's a few numbers to point out, and remember this is just that K-12 subtotal number. This doesn't include running start or any of that. So you'll see our kind of trend goes from 19 to 20. We had 8,835 when COVID hit. That dropped significantly to 7,926. Increased slightly the next year at 8,041. And as things opened up more and people came back to school and things became more normal, we saw an increase to 8,408. A slight decrease after that to 8,335. The next one is incorrect. That should be 8,305. I apologize for that. For the 24-25 year, for 25-26, it's 8,292. And for our budgeted K-12 enrollment, we have 8,268. And this all follows trends related to COVID and more recently kind of birth rates and how they're impacting school districts nationwide.
Okay, before we move on, are there any other questions about enrollment, projected, historical trends? Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about staffing. The table you see there is our 25-26 budgeted figures versus our 26-27 proposed budget. The far right column is the budget variance. So the difference between the 25-26 budget amount and the 26-27 amount. The certificated FTE, we saw a slight reduction. This change actually, let me step back. So if you're looking at our F-195 document that's attached in the agenda versus this presentation, you'll notice a difference of 5 in the 26-27 proposed budget certificated FTE.
And that's the bullet number.
Yep. We went through an accounting system conversion this year in April, and the old system, we didn't have to add FTEs for stipends, for substitutes, and for other costs, other pay.
Like miscellaneous.
Yep. And the new system, we had some headaches with it, and we had to add 5 additional certificated FTEs in order to budget for substitute costs, for stipends, for other pays, other salaries. So that's why you see that difference. The numbers that we're showing you here, we wanted it to be a true reflection of our certificated staffing FTE, the numbers that we're staffing.
Because ultimately what you saw is decreases in elementary enrollment, right? Your CERT FTE is not going to increase when your elementary enrollment has decreased. So we actually did do reductions to attrition in elementary, but because of this system conversion, when we're talking about, like, think of it as like a placeholder, right? You had to put in a 1.0 placeholder, and then next to it, we'd have to put the value of what our substitutes were going to cost over the course of the year. So we don't just have 1.0 FTE of substitute costs, but in order to budget for those costs, that's how we had to put it into the system. Therefore, Chris Bishop and Julie Mondry went through and they netted out or took out those placeholders so that what we were actually seeing is a true reflection of the actual staff, human beings behind positions in the buildings. So overall, we're seeing a net variance of approximately a 0.78 FTE. It's only a 0.78 though, even though we reduced those elementary positions because we passed the levy. And one of the levy priorities was increased, professional development, new curriculum adoption for staff. We increased instructional facilitator FTE in math, in technology, amongst elsewhere, in order to help provide that professional development to staff. So it's an offset on that side.
For the classified FTE, I want to make a point of clarification. The classified FTEs are any staff member that does not require a certificate. So I myself am a classified FTE. Ashley is a classified FTE. Our bus drivers are classified FTEs. Our custodians. So this isn't just the PSE groups. This is non-rep. This is, like I said, bus drivers, custodians, anybody that doesn't require a certificate. The decrease in 8 FTEs from last year to this year, 6 of those FTEs came from the non-represented classified group, one of those being a transportation supervisor position. And then ESS, our employee support services, saw a reduction there. as well as a couple of other areas at the district level. The additional reductions, the additional 2 FTEs can be seen because of decreased enrollment. Para positions were decreased. So it's, again, this is tying our staffing to our actual enrollment and staying fiscally responsible.
So one of the things that Chris had touched on regarding that classified FTE reduction, prior to this upcoming school year for 26-27, we had a legal team of staff, 2 paralegals, a set aside or a actual public records officer that just did public records and such. So we reduced that team when our liability insurance bill came in and was going to be $1.5 million higher than the 25-26 school year. And so we reduced the team, which might seem contrary to, you're like, wait, your legal costs increased, so you reduced the legal team. Legal costs increased not because Peninsula School District is a risky district. Any current cases that we have out there weren't even included in the mod factor that is utilized to increase our rate. What increased is the reinsurance factor, reinsurance market, and insurance. So just like when you have car insurance and they want to know where your car is going to be garaged. The reason is because you have insurance actuaries behind the scenes saying, ooh, Texas, we know that they're going to receive soft L size hail, so you're going to increase cost, reinsurance cost, in order to provide insurance in these areas. The same thing in liability insurance. Washington State, for all 50 states, is considered a notoriously litigious state. And so in addition to being a litigious state, they also have very low thresholds when it comes to public entity liability, meaning if a public entity is found to be 1% liable or even 0.1% liable for the outcome of something, we are 100% liable for the financial outcome of that situation. So because of that, our reinsurers, who sometimes are located in, let's say, the UK, we have one of them located in the UK, they're like, ooh, if you want us to do business in Washington State, we know our risk is higher, we're going to increase your rates. So the rate increase that WSRMP, who is our risk pool, all of the member districts in this pool last year received on average 45% rate increases. It is not because every single one of their districts is a risky district. The average was 45. We were at 46% for our rate increase. I have a peer in another district whose rate increase was 67%, and they have not closed any cases recently that would have amounted to that. They got stuck with 67%. One of the things that I did when I met with our risk pool to sort of understand why we were increasing by $1.5 million is I totaled the total amount of premiums Peninsula School District has paid to the risk pool over the last decade, because they do our loss history for the last decade. So if something happened 10 years ago, we're still going to be paying for it now. So I totaled everything that we have paid them versus what they have paid out on claims. We, the district, has paid the risk pool $4 million more than what they have paid out on claims for us. So I said, great, you should be applauding us because we are helping fund you. That is amazing for us. But at the same time, they didn't think that that was an adequate reason to decrease the amount. They were going to be increasing our insurance premiums. And so we're still paying the increase of the $1.5 million. But when something like that occurs, when you have a significant increase in expenditure, you always go back to what's connected to it, and now I need to decrease, because guess what's going to happen? Increase of insurance like that? Well, now I'm going to have to contract with WSRMP because they cover the costs associated with, let's say, an investigation. So instead of having in-house staff that we have to do that investigation, I push it to the risk pool and say, hey, we need an investigator. And then they give us an investigator and they foot the bill. Okay, so instead of us footing the bill now for investigations and such through our own salary and benefit costs, it will now be cost shifted back over to WSRMP for us to recoup some of that $1.5 million that we are now having to absorb all in 1 year. So hence the reason the layoff of those staff members in order to offset the cost of that increase. So, no, it's not negotiable. They like you to think that it potentially is, but no, it's not. But what was more disheartening this time around is that they gave us the rate increase on May 14th, the day before CERT contracts are due. And it wasn't just us, right? So all of their member districts got their rate letters the day before CERT contracts were due. And so even, being on the WASBO Legislative Committee, that was one of our legislative priorities that are going to be coming out. The impact to districts that did not have the ability to absorb that level of an increase from one year to the next, it was significant. It was increasingly significant, and districts were having to rely on layoffs of non-represented staff in order to offset that cost. So we always have conversations about it. I argue the mod factor, and which they use, a mod factor of 1.0 means you're going to pay the exact base increase. A mod factor of 1.02, you're going to be paying 2% more than that base increase. But at the same time, they have an operating bottom line, and they divvy out what those costs are going to be to all member districts. And so if they give on one, who are they going to go recoup the rest of the cost?
In addition to that, there's only 2 risk pools in Washington State, so there's not much competition, and you have to give 3 years notice.
Yeah, 2.5 years notice with WSRMP.
If you are switching, if you want to switch from WSRMP to Propel.
Clear
or
risk,
Clear
Propel.
risk.
Yeah.
So it makes it really difficult.
Quick question. You mentioned that one of the reasons is Washington is very litigious. That's not new.
No.
Why now is it a big increase?
Yep.
I don't know the history of our increases. And then how long do we know before they do another? Like, are we getting another 50% increase next year?
Oh, absolutely. We've had over 100% of increases since I've just worked here. When I started here, our liability insurance was approximately 1.6 mil. And I'm just now going into my 5th year here, and we're now up to 4.5 mil. And so you guys, that's over 4 years. Okay, so absolutely, we can expect for this to continue. But what has actually increased it, Matt, is sex abuse cases, and how Washington has created or not created statutes in regards to older sex abuse cases. So something that may have occurred in, let's say, the 60s, and individuals are just coming forward with the claims. That 100% still can be heard by the courts now. Obviously, they need to, provide some type of evidence or proof. They're public records requesting documents that are literally carbon copied and in a basement somewhere. But the amount of cases like that have been settling recently has been significant. And so it's becoming more risky for these reinsurers to then do business in Washington State because of the sex abuse claim increases. So,
It's not just school district, states
No.
going broke on it as well.
well, but the state put aside money to handle theirs. They could put aside money for school districts as well, but that's another topic.
Well, and I just like to make that really clear. We have gone to the Hill and had that conversation about insurance because the SAM cases have changed, and that occurred since right around.
Oh, there was just a change here a handful of years ago. I
Exactly.
think March of last year, there was also an additional change to it.
Right, and so I sat on the WSRMP board for multiple years and saw all the cases, and that is why the increases are phenomenal.
Yeah. It does. At a low percentage, though, I would say, knock on wood, obviously, especially in this region. But because there hasn't recently been something over here, we're not seeing as big of an impact. What we're currently dealing with, though, right now in Eastern Washington, the fires, for a perfect example, state of emergency, natural disaster, all of that. There's a bunch now of, federal resources being directed to the state to help offset impacts to the districts that were impacted in Eastern Washington, either through loss of enrollment because families have had to move out until their homes are being rebuilt or whatever it happens to be. So I would anticipate that those districts, as they see the claims being paid on that, here in about 2 to 3 years, they're going to see an increase to their overall rates. But the reinsurance market for that will continue to increase, and they're not going to be basing it on whether or not you're in Western or Eastern Washington. What they'll see is, hey, we had to dip into their reserves, basically X number of millions of dollars to cover fire, natural disasters within the state. So now in order to provide coverage for that, we are going to increase our rates to help recoup some of the dollars paid in Western Washington. That's one of the sort of downfalls of a pool. The only other option in Washington state is to self-insure, which is something that you don't want to do.
The other thing that's important to note that it's a national issue. So if
Yeah.
something happens in Florida or in Texas, then all of the insurers, then it has a ripple effect. And so
Exactly. It's just so when you're looking at how they calculate out what your insurance premiums are going to be, your property loss, whether or not it's facility property loss or a vehicle bus property loss, is a small percentage of what your actual costs are. The vast majority of the cost that a district pays is for your SAM, your sex abuse type coverage, boundary invasion, special education is also a piece that you pay a higher premium for, especially because Washington State tends to have more restrictive requirements than the federal government does. Therefore, other states have looser special education laws than what Washington State does. Therefore, if they know they're reinsuring a Washington pool, they know they're likely to see more special education lawsuits. Therefore, they increase the rate for us on that side too.
And lastly, Matt, thank you for the question. Many times the board of WSRMP will pass a % increase, and then we will find out within like that month.
Yep.
So to anticipate what it's going to look like, we can't do that at this time, but we should look at a pattern and a trend in the past and anticipate that it's not going to be less than that.
Yeah. They give us what's sort of comical and why I would never suggest someone trend on a lower end is they gave us a rate letter in February that said 16%. And then 3 months later, they say, psych, never mind, 45. And so a lot of districts are planning and budgeting and staffing based upon, oh, hey, we're going to get 16%, give or take. But you don't anticipate 16 to 45. That's nothing anyone, or some of those districts that were 16 to 67, that's not what you're going to be anticipating. Now, I always just expect for us to see an increase in excess of at least $500,000 based upon the year over year trend of what we've been seeing in this district for the last several years, with WSRMP specifically. And then a good thing is we, I reach out to my peer district to see what they're looking at as far as losses, because if you see one of your peer districts pop in a paper, then you know that we as a whole will likely see increases in the upcoming year in order to offset the cost.
Okay, so we've covered enrollment, we've covered staffing. Now we're going to talk revenues, and we're still on general fund. Total, I'm not going to read word for word all of the different types of revenues or the different programs that are funded in the categoricals, but at a bottom line, our revenues, we're projecting $181,823,000. That's an increase of about $8 million from last year to this year. Last year was $173.3 million. So we see a healthy increase. And the bottom line there, Ashley mentioned the capital projects or the SS&T levy, reimbursing the general fund. That's that bottom line before the total. The safety, security, and technology transfer. That's the amount of dollars that we are seeing in expenditures in the general fund that we are then doing a transfer at month end. And it adds expenditures and revenues to, if you're looking at our budgets from prior to when we passed the SS&T levy to currently, you might see a big jump there in 24, 25. Yeah. So just if you're looking at historical data, that might pop.
And then you can also cross-check that number against the number in the capital project fund, because you have a transfer out of a fund, a transfer in to a different fund. And this, when we go through the budget process, one of the things that we have to note in there is transfers between funds, because that's how at the state level, they approve our ability to do so, is by having it approved at the budget.
And then this next slide, this is just a visual. Everybody loves charts. But you can see our biggest chunk of revenues come from state funding. That's basic education. That's those categorical programs like LAP, like transitional bilingual, state special education. And then our second biggest pie piece is local taxes. That's our EP&O levy. And then if you look at the purple, I want to say it is, purple slice, that is our SS&T transfer. So all in all, local levies make up about 20% of our budgeted revenues in the general fund, whether that's coming directly into the general fund for our EP&O levy or into the capital projects fund, and then we get it to the general fund via transfer. Now we're going to talk expenditures.
So this is the other side of the coin. Basically, for our general fund expenditures, your biggest cost is always going to be your staffing costs, including salaries and benefits. For our bargained salary increases, we use the 26-27 implicit price deflator of 2.6%. This is basically just the inflation rate that the state uses in terms of funding. So if you think of a prototypically funded teacher, if they say get a salary of $100,000 from the state, which they don't, the next year they would be we would be given $102,600.
Yeah.
But that is not the reality. Usually we get much less.
And with that being said, that does not mean that staff only received a 2.7 or 2.6% IPD increase. That means that is a base salary increase. Technically, I don't like utilizing the terminology, but a lot of people would utilize the terminology the pass-through. Again, we're only getting it on prototypically staffed individuals. And so like our CBAs will call out, hey, in this year, you're going to get IPD plus 2%, IPD plus 1%, IPD plus 0.5. What we're trying to call out is that the state IPD, what they're considering as the cost of living, is 2.6 for the 26-27 school year. So the base pay increase for staff is 2.6% plus whatever that other inflationary factor was that was bargained for staff.
Awesome. So then we're also going to have our employer benefit costs. And one thing that we wanted to point out this year was our substitute costs. And the current system for how substitute costs are funded is that we are paid 3 days funded at approximately $157 a day or $20.93 an hour for each prototypically staffed certificated teacher. In all reality, I think the deficit between the teachers we have and the prototypically staffed teachers is about 160 last time I checked.
That are not funded, therefore receive 0 of those 3 days.
And also, when we're talking about substitutes, it's important to remember that we're also, in a way, competing with our neighboring districts for our substitute costs. And the amount we pay for substitute is already much higher than the $157.
And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about specifically with this is regarding WASBO legislative priorities. And I know that WASDA is getting on board with this too. Substitute costs have not been adjusted in more than 2 decades. 2 decades, it has been sitting at $157 and change. So when you're looking at, when I'm putting in there $20.93 an hour, so you have a cert sub, 7.5 hours coming in, and the state is saying pay them $21. I know that my high school age son went and got a job at McDonald's making more than $21 an hour. You're not going to be super competitive getting individuals with degrees to come in and actually sub for you. But in addition to that, the amount of actual funding that we get for subs is nominal at best. We have millions in cost overruns regarding substitute costs. So teachers get 12 sick days, not 3. They also get personal days. Okay, so we're already at 15 days for every single teacher that we have, and that's only teachers. Guess what? Classified staff get sick too. You know, they need to be out. We need to backfill that, front desk individual at a building so that they're there to greet individuals, open the door, answer phone calls, all of that. So we have sub costs outside of that. Classified staff get 0 funded days, none whatsoever. And so we did a ton of work on this with WASBO, with our UW CFO soup class group as well, because ultimately we do need to find a way to at least get this into the current decade when it comes to paying versus relying on something that's a few decades old. So.
Awesome. So apart from our staffing costs is going to be your materials, supplies, and operating costs, or MSOCs. This includes our contracted programs, our supplies, our travel, and our capital outlay. And specifically, you'll see this in investment in things like our new math curriculum or our new Spanish curriculum. We are also improving our devices for our students across the district to MacBook Neos, which are going to be much better than what other people had to use.
He's very sad about this. We've heard about it.
And then we also have our contracted services for things like maybe a position couldn't be backfilled, or a lot of our vendors. Also our utilities, our insurance, our audit costs, our fuel, our tires, our supplies, and our legal costs. And importantly, over the past few years, once we passed the capital projects levy, you'll see that we increased our expenditures to help pay for things that can't be capitalized in the capital projects fund. I believe our limit right now is anything under $5,000 can't be placed in the capital projects fund. That needs to be spent in the general fund and then later reimbursed through that transfer.
So that's what we're talking about with when we say cost shift. It's accounting lingo. We're shifting one cost from one fund to the number or to another, but you have to do so through actual transfers or cutting checks in order to ensure you have clean accounting practices. MSOC disclosure. The MSOC disclosure is one of the only required slides in a budget presentation, FYI. So, very important slide.
Yes. So what this table's telling us, we have our projected MSOC revenue just over 13 million. If you look towards the bottom, you'll see total budgeted expenditures almost 26 million. So nearly double of what we are funded for. There's a difference of $12.7 million in just our MSOCs. And this is just looking at Program 01, which is basic education, and Program 97, which is district-wide services. So that's where central office administration, that's where grounds, maintenance, those types of things live. Utilities, that's where those live. And
this is not payroll
insurance.
And benefit.
Yep.
So only basically the overhead is what is running through this. So when you guys hear and you guys know, but in the community, when you hear that we're lobbying and testifying at the Capitol in order for increases in MSOC, this is why. It's to hit at that $12.7 million deficit. And this isn't a bunch of extra stuff. This is supporting our curriculum, supporting new library books, supporting software costs.
Heating our buildings.
Correct. And so all of those pieces, we are expected to run a district with 17 buildings with a total of 13.1 million for all of your operational costs. So utilities, all of your garbage, all of that, 13 mil. That's less than $1 million per one of just our educational building, our school.
Now, something the legislature did this past year was they used to fund these categories and give you a specific amount for supplies, a specific amount for contracted services, so on and so forth. This last year, they wiped all that out. 24-25 during that legislative session. They wiped all that out, and now they just give us one number and say, this is your MSOC allocation. Spend it responsibly.
And that was political. So what had ended up happening is districts were able to show, hey, you're giving me $300,000 for liability insurance, but my liability insurance is costing me $2 million. And so that made a lot of sense mathematically. So they didn't like it. So then what they said is, you want to know what? We're going to go ahead and give you a one-time increase, okay, a lump sum payout. District got about $500,000 from that one-time increase. And then what we're going to do from now on is we aren't going to separate the categories. So you're not going to know how much you're getting funded for tech, how much you're getting funded for curriculum, how much you're getting funded for library materials, utilities, insurance. We're just going to give you $1 value per pupil, so full-time FTE. And then just depends upon how responsibly you spend it. So if you choose not to spend it on your liability insurance, that's not on us.
They
That's
give
on
it
you.
to you in a bulk payout, and then we have to give it back to them in an itemized fashion.
That's exactly right. And so what you're going to see though, and why we wanted to specifically bring that out, is when we started in these future slides, when we start talking about specific like actual programs and revenues in, and you're going to see $0, it's because you want to know what state. I'm not going to state that we're utilizing the MSOC revenue on curriculum, because at the end of the day, if a district had to cut, they can't cut electricity. They can't cut garbage service. They can't cut water because we can't open a building then. They can't not have a fire suppression system. So at the end of the day, the priority is keeping the doors legally open. And guess what? You're utilizing outdated curriculum. That's what some of these districts are having to do. And so when it comes to looking at how those MSOCs are used, what we go off of is it's used to keep the doors open, and then whatever we have left over can offset the rest of these programming. But as you can see, having a $12.7 million deficit, you're not going to have a bunch remaining.
One last point I want to make, just to continue to harp on insurance, since it's a WASBO legislative priority, our insurance bill is $4.5 million. That's 34% of our of our total MSOC revenue. So just something to keep in mind. And I'm sure Ashley will continue to talk about that as we move through the year. Now we're going to go, like Ashley said, we're going to go program through, not all the programs, but a few of the programs that have been kind of called out to the board or called out to Ashley throughout the year. We're going to kind of walk through slides looking at funding, looking at expenditures, what was either budgeted or what was spent in 25-26, what we're projecting our ending expenditures to be, and comparing that to what we're budgeting in the upcoming year.
One of the things that we had to take note as we went through this process is if it's a program like community support, so program 89, that operates during the summer. And so I don't know as of right now what our full ending expenditure value is going to be, because there's still 2 weeks. And we still have invoices out there that haven't been paid, that when they're paid, they'll be accrued back to this year. So an example like that is something that we will be going off of what we know to date, projected based upon what's been billed, what we're expecting to receive through the end of August. Whereas if it's something that's more of curricular in nature and costs would have ended at the end of the school year, that's something that we can look at and is a known, and we don't have a bunch of speculation as far as how the summer is going to have impacted that.
I have a quick supplies question. How big's the number of like what when I was young we would have just said school supplies, like go to Target, get the list. I know we cover that. I'm not sharing an opinion on that. I'm asking how much of the 9.6 million
Is school supplies?
is school supplies.
$750,000.
Okay.
Awesome. So the first slide that we're, and the first program that we're pointing out is going to be the transition to kindergarten slide. And this is kind of what David was alluding to earlier with how this program is actually funded and how it changed going into this year. Basically, at the first line, you'll see our FTE. You already know this information from earlier, but we went from 105.8 to projected 180 this next year. That's an increase in 74.2 FTE. And this was a levy priority for us. We were already expecting to be spending in a deficit for those students, but the big change that happened this past year is for 25-26, we were funded at 100 at a cap of 106.9 FTE. That cap was reduced by 72.4% to 29.46. So we're going to have 180 kids in the school, and we're only going to get funding for 29.46 of those. And this is why you see a massive drop off in our revenues from 1.4 million to 370,000. At the same time, our expenditures did increase from 1.16 million to just under 2.1 million. That was a $937,000 increase for our expansion and just general year-over-year costs. And that puts us at a deficit for the 26-27 proposed budget of 1.7, when in the prior year we actually had a surplus of $243,000.
And so when he's talking about a surplus, he's talking about carryover revenue. And so when the state a few years ago made the change from TKs included in your enrollment, and it's funded just as if you're any of your other enrollment, to a standalone program funding, which is what it is now, by doing that, what the state has said is that transition to kindergarten is not part of basic education because your general enrollment is. So ultimately what we're seeing here is we're seeing the costs associated with increasing by 4 teachers. But in addition to that, one of the things that we have found with TK and our earliest learners is you need to obviously invest in the classroom, okay? Because those 4-year-olds get very excited about a dollhouse, about an outdoor play kitchen, all of that kind of stuff, because they are learning through playing and it's integrated, and those teachers are really good at teaching those skills through interactive play. Some of our TKs do most of their learning outdoors. We want to make sure that we're providing good quality coats and boots and all of that kind of stuff. So in addition to the budget for this, for the increase in staff salaries and benefits, we've also allocated through special services, I would call it a nominal couple $1,000 level budget for those teachers to utilize with their TK classrooms, whether or not that's taking them to a park to go, look at different leaves and be able to learn in that manner, or go to a stream, whatever it happens to be. They have basically a specific budget that they're going to be able to pull from in order to enhance their classroom experience in the upcoming year. We have found a lot of success in this district with the transitional kindergarten program. As these students move up through kindergarten, first, second, third grade, we are finding that they are achieving at higher levels in third grade than peers that have not had access to programs like that. So we're actually really excited to see what happens here in the next several years, having more of our students have participated in the program. It is a significant levy commitment. It really is. Now, the information regarding the reduction of our TK funded slots came after our levy. Okay, so when we were running the original levy campaign, we did think that we were going to need to fund 4 additional classrooms. We were not anticipating the state coming down and saying, no, you guys are going to have to fund 8. And so ultimately what we're having to do is we're having to draw at a higher percentage from the levy in order to offset the program. But one of the things that we did this year that is allowing us to do that going into this next year is the levy that we just ran and passed. It starts in January. So we have not been collecting on that new levy value. So that new levy starts in calendar year 2027. Even though that levy, once we passed it and once we knew that we were going to have committed revenues, we already started implementing those levy priorities. Math adoptions, hiring of ground staff, posting of our maintenance coordinator, professional development that occurred over the course of the summer. All of those pieces were already built into levy priorities, but we funded them through fund balance, okay, to show commitment, like, hey, you guys said that this is a priority. No, we're not going to wait, another year in order to get started on, the math adoption or whatever it happens to be. We know that we have committed revenues at that side. Let's rely on fund balance in order to offset the costs now and get a head start on that. So then because of that, the costs associated like with those adoptions and professional development, we have now cost shifted into the 25-26 school year. It has freed up revenue capacity in the levy for the 26-27 school year. in order to cover the difference. In addition to that, we have about $200,000 left of carryover that we're going to utilize to help offset the first couple months, and then the carryover will be gone. With programs like these, the state does require you to separately account for it. So we know every dollar into TK and we know every dollar out for TK. It's all separately accounted for. And so ultimately, when we're seeing that large of a value, the second this came to fruition and we knew that we were going to see this reduction, it was look at current fund balance. What can we do with this to offset costs, future costs in upcoming school year in order to give capacity for this? The last thing we wanted to do is make a levy commitment, go back out to the community and say, look, we're still adding the 4 classrooms, but the state cut us by 4 classrooms. So in reality, you're going to get exactly what you had before. You're just now going to be paying for it through local levy. So that's what we're seeing on this side, but it is a significant levy commitment.
So based on what you just said, to play it back and get confirmation, nothing else from the levy, gets less funding now because TK went up. That to offset that's going to come from somewhere else, not from levy with anything else that we talked about.
Yeah, so one of the things that we always do, so the catch-all for levy ends up being facilities. And so, for example, going into the 25-26 budget year, in the 23 levy that was approved, there was $1 million set aside each year, each school year, for facilities. And so what we do is we slow roll that. And so it's like, okay, Patrick, you get 300,000. Okay, start with 300,000. We're going to go through the year. We're going to wait and see what our enrollment count is. Once our enrollment count comes in, then we add back to that. That's what we do with levy for absolutely anything, though. Ultimately, when it comes to levy dollars, you always cut furthest from the classroom as possible. And so if there are reductions to be had, they would never be, you're not going to see them in curriculum, professional development, student supplies, let's say, for example, either school supplies or classroom supplies, building budget, which will be another slide you're going to see. So what you're going to see as we go through this is there's been a ton of increased investments in a lot of these programs, even though, which are levy committed programs, even though we saw a deficit here. Part of it is because of that cost shift back into 25-26. For example, we just paid a nearly $500,000 math invoice. I think it was like $486,000. It was coded to come out of the 26-27 school year. We looked at ending fund balance capacity and total budgetary capacity because we can't ourselves spend in excess of what the total approved budgetary dollar value is. Saw that we had capacity. We moved that invoice then into the 25-26 school year, freeing up $500,000 on that side for the 26-27 school year. So Patrick has been notified that he's on a limited budget to start the year until I see where enrollment is. Then once enrollment comes in, as long as enrollment hits target, then we're good. Then we piecemeal his budget back out to him for facilities. So that's the only area that I will say could be impacted if enrollment doesn't come in either where we were expecting it to be or higher. Let's say Running Start comes in significantly higher than what we were anticipating. That would have a negative impact because the money flows through to the local community college. And then what you're going to see as we go through these slides, you're going to see like music and curriculum and a bunch of some of those other levy commitments. And you're going to see the increases on that side. And we'll go through some more of that as we go.
Okay. For TK, I mean, the 6260 is definitely going to severely negatively impact school districts all over the state. Some schools are going to have to eliminate TK altogether because they're not going to be in a financial situation that we are. And then I'm not saying that because you sort of addressed this, I was going to ask a question. Had we said we're going to expand TK to all schools in the levy to pass it, and then the state didn't fund TK, we can't then go back and say, because the state cut our funding, we aren't going to move it to all the schools the way we said we would. That would have been suicide for us to do that.
Correct.
So it is, initially in our first year, you have forward funded and you've thoughtfully, as you always do, front loaded some stuff, but it absolutely is potential that in the ongoing years going forward that it could negatively impact our school district.
Absolutely.
I just want to be clear it's going to negatively impact our schools.
And how both the board and the district sees that is through, so our levy spending plan. So you publish your levy spending plan when you go out for a levy, okay? And that's based upon all the knowns that you know at that time. You have all of these categories with these specific dollars. Then you go through and you do budget, right? And you're looking at that levy spending plan as you go through and do your budget, and you want to at least meet the bottom line of that dollar value. And then once you've gone through and done that from a budgetary aspect and budget is approved, if you have fluctuations of those levy values, let's say you budgeted, I don't know, an easy one. Let's say you budgeted for TBIP and we did a nominal amount for TBIP of, let's say, $200,000. But the federal government came in and said, you want to know what? We're not removing TBIP funding, which, I mean, could be a possibility maybe. Then we would have no need to fund TBIP through local levy because it's already fully funded. So you 100% without any issue can shift that. There's not anything in state, local law, anything that says you can't not spend it on that if you're already fulfilling the needs of the program, right? And so that's what we look at, but we go line by line by line. And one of the reasons why we made this budget presentation a little bit more detailed is because when you look at a budget, that 200-page document that is attached, it's a bunch of accounting pieces. We actually have thousands of line items of specific budgetary data that what the system calls is crosswalks to a specific program code. So you may have 22 pieces of source data that's going to funnel into one specific number, and the only number that's going to populate in your budget or your financial statements is that one number. But that is a commingled number. We see it on our end, but a reader is not going to be able to see it. So this time what we decided to do on some of those areas that have been sort of talked about over the last year, we have all the financial subcategory data on it. So we just pulled it out and included it on a separate slide so that individuals can know truly what was budgeted, both in 25-26, or what the actuals were in 25-26 versus what we are budgeting for the upcoming year.
David, to your point, however, when we fund this TTK and then we find out that we had over 70% reduction, that was unknown to us at that time, but that is a conversation as we move forward. Whether we can continue to do this. What I do know is that many school districts who were not going out for a levy, who had already committed, pulled back their TTK, they closed them, or they made them tuition based. And so many of them
significant tuition, over $1,000 per month to get your kid into TK.
Right. So what we have seen is that TTK program, so there are many rural school districts that were just funded for like 18 kids. They are not going to run a program because the money doesn't pencil out for them.
Thousands of kids across the state.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that really is impacting our early learning, and really a shame.
Yeah,
It's
and
shame.
even last year, one of the things, it was actually sort of comical, and I think I may have talked about it during last year's budget presentation, but we have to do a piece, the very first piece of your budget is doing what's called an F203. And F203 is technically, it's an online calculator through the state where you go in and you put all your enrollment numbers through all of these different categories. And we go through, we do it, and I'm like, well, we're budgeting for 106 TK. The state had already told us at that time that they weren't going to fund us for it. And I was like, well, I'm still putting it in the budget calculator at 106. I don't really care. So we submitted it. We get a call from the ESD and then subsequently the state saying, ooh, I think you messed up. You put 106 and we're only funding you for this lower value. I think it was 96 at the time. I said, no, I didn't mess up. I said, we have 106 kids. So that's our enrollment. So that's the number I'm going with. And they're like, oh, but you should really reduce it to 96. I said, I'm not reducing it to 96. No, I said that is transparency. That is the number of kids we have. Fund us at less because that's your prerogative, but it's our prerogative to state what our enrollment is. So then the state turns around and about 5 months later, they say, God, a bunch of schools collapsed their TK classes and we have all these extra seats. So Peninsula School District, being one of the only districts that actually put the information out there regarding our enrollment, they funded us for another 11 student FTE because we had the students to fund. And I know, but that's just for our community. Don't pass it on. So, but it's the same thing. We built into the budget, and you guys will see it, 180 TK students, even though they're going to fund 29. So they already said, hey, your number's off. And we're like, no, it's not. That's our actual number. So. We had the second largest program in the state, only second. We had the second largest program in the state, meaning total number of students enrolled in the program. We had the second highest percentage cut. The only district that beat us out in the total percentage was Issaquah, and they were 0.2% cut above us, but they only had a fraction of the students that we had. They were only running approximately 70 students through their TK program, where we were in excess of 100. So we have had a robust TK program in this district. Yep, exactly. Hence the reason our as of like literally going into the 26-27 school year, I cannot say with certainty because a lot of districts have completely altered what they're doing with TK. Yeah. But it is something that we are looking at because of one of like, even on the WASBO legislative side, it's like if something like this is going to happen, where's that grandfathering? Where's that phasing in? Where's that not from one moment to the next, you just lost, in excess of $1 million and go find a way to recoup it. And so those are the type of, like, I understand that there's budgetary shortfalls at the state. Like, I understand business. But if you're not working with your partners so that they can appropriately budget, it becomes problematic for all of us.
So our next slide is going to be state special education. These are all our state dollars that come in from our projected SPED enrollment. So for our revenues for the 26-27 year, we are projecting $22.8 million, up from $21.97 million. Our expenditures at the same time decreased slightly from $29,388,000 to $29,157,000, showing a variance of negative $231,000 in expenditures. Anything red is a negative number, just so you know. And for our deficit at the end of the year for the 26-27 proposed budget, we are projecting a $6.275 million shortfall.
One of the things I do want to call out, when you have someone standing up here in any district stating that your special education expenditures are anticipated to go down, that district is doing something good, okay? Because that is not the way that normally goes. And so there has been a huge recruiting effort with Jana's team and Lisa Ray's team in special services to find direct hires for our ESA positions, SLPs, OTs, PTs. When we have to contract through an agency, sometimes that's leading to double the cost of what we could actually employ someone for when they're a direct W-2 hire. So the fact that we're seeing expenditures decrease, even if it's $231,000, I will 100% take it. When you're seeing that $904,000 increase, you guys, the one place that the state did make movement on, okay, is special education. So did they fully fund us? Did they come close to fully funding us? No. Did they give us more than what we had previously? Yes, I will take the $900,000 if that is what we are going to get, because an extra $900,000 and reducing expenditures is putting us in a positive trend, even though technically we're still not fully funded.
Okay. Next we have, if I get it up there, next we have music. And how when Ashley was talking about, 25, 30 different accounts kind of funneling down into one, this is one of them. Music is a basic education program. So while we have these expenditures broken out by themselves here, when you're looking at the F-195 document, these are included in program 01 or 01. But as Ashley said, these are levy priorities. We want to call out the investment into the programs. So that's kind of what we're doing. A point of clarification, this is district general fund spending. So this isn't ASB funds that are spent on band.
Donations doesn't include that either.
Nope.
This is literally general fund coming directly from the levy, and it has nothing to do with salaries and benefits. This is supplies. This is sheet music. This is instrument. This is festival registration fees. This
And
is
transportation.
Okay? All of those pieces. So in 25-26, we were already funding the music programs, band, choir. I understand orchestra is going to be a new program, but still band, choir. And this is particularly in the secondary level, you guys, at $237,224 for those classes. We have increased it to $301,230. This is building level directive spending for their bands and their choirs. So $301,000 for a district of our size with the number of bands or music programs that we have is significant. I recently received an email from an individual at another district that in his off time rent some of our facilities for some private organization band work. And that individual was like, well, in my district, we only receive, and I can't remember the exact value. I want to say it was around $3,000, $3,500 total for their entire high school, their high school that is larger than ours, for their band and music program. And I was like, oh, yeah, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars funneling for music, for band and choir in our programs. So this is a piece that, just from a very transparent aspect, we wanted to put out there. This isn't the district directing those dollars either. This is what we consider like building level budgets or program level directive budgets. Both of those are included in this, meaning the buildings get a piece of this that they are determining how to spend, and by they, it's the music teacher or the band teacher. Then in addition to that, there's a higher level pot that is used for like instrument replacement, and the professional learning community team, the PLC team for the music teachers, they get together and they determine how that piece is being spent. So again, not district, not us telling them how to spend it, but they're going to have approximately $300,000 in the coming year for this program.
And when you're looking at the table, you'll notice the revenues are $0. We do not receive any state funding for music or the arts. So it's truly a levy priority. The bottom bullet up there, though, the arts, including some of the theater classes, are heavily funded by CTE. Is that saying we have 16 elective classes that are CTE funded?
That are art classes,
Yep.
art equivalency.
Yep.
And then we also have CTE slides built in later. But one of the things, because people tend to group music and the arts into one category. And so I just wanted to be able to separate this out and say, when we're talking about this, that I'm not grouping in music and the arts into this dollar. This is truly just music dedicated. The arts is coming through on the CTE side later on.
Next, we have High Cap and Eagle Quest, which is a High Cap program. We do receive some state funding for this. However, it's an interesting funding model. The state funds us at 8% of our student FTE, regardless of how many of our students test as highly capable. So you see the revenues up there. We brought in $304,000 in 25-26, where we budgeted for that amount. 26-27, we're budgeting an increase of about 13.5 13,600. Expenditures are staying fairly consistent, but I mean, across all programs, we're seeing increases, just cost of living. But expenditures are going up from 834,000 to 866,000. That the cost overruns in this program are funded through our levy. So $530,000 was budgeted last year as a cost overrun in HICAP. 548,000 is budgeted in 26-27 as our cost overrun. These figures do include staffing and instructional supplies, testing costs, to everything to operate the program as a whole.
One of the things to note with how we run our highly capable program in Peninsula School District, so when the state funnels through that, what they consider enhanced funding for 8% of your student population, we test in more than 8% of our student population, for one. But they're giving you that as an enhancement so that you can differentiate curriculum for your highly capable students. Peninsula School District has historically run, and some of you guys may have the data better than I would in regards to this, has historically run what are called PACE classrooms, but classrooms that are filled with just students that have tested into the district's highly capable program, and they go into a specific PACE classroom with teachers that are trained in curriculum differentiation for highly capable students, and then they're with their peers that have also tested into that program. When you run a program like at that type of a level, it does tend to be more expensive than truly just differentiating curriculum for your highly capable students. Hence the reason you're seeing a higher level of cost overrun. One of the other things that we did is we set aside, so Eagle Quest, although that is considered our highly capable program on the Key Peninsula, it's not made up of only highly capable students. So it's highly capable first, and then if there's room within the program, they take other students into those classes as well. We heard last year that there was, additional needs for, either the teacher, the students in the classroom and such. And so, we set aside a specific supplies budget to either be used on field trips or supplies for Eagle Quest for the upcoming year. And so they have that dedicated funding that flows through their building in order to do whatever it might be that they need to do for that program in the coming year. And you're going to see in a lot of these areas, that's one of the things that we're doing is we're just going to separately account for it. Okay, so here we're creating this program. This is the Eagle Quest funding program. Here's the revenues in. If there happen to be revenues in, here's expenditures out.
Awesome. So our next slide is going to be our district athletics. And keep in mind, this is also, like music, not inclusive of any of the ASB funding or revenues that they get under the ASB fund. So looking at this, we have $0 budgeted in revenues because this is not specifically funded by the state. And, if you were to consider it, MSOCs is just kind of part of that nebulous singular number that isn't broken down. For our expenditures, they are increasing quite significantly from $2.5 million to just under $3.1 million. That leads us to consequently have the same level increase in our deficit from 2.5 to just under 3.1. And this is helping to pay for things like league dues, ref fees, equipment, things like stipends for all the coaches and staff. And yeah.
So, and this has been one of these topics that has been discussed quite at length over the course of this last year. And there was a misconception regarding whether or not the district was funding athletics, not funding athletics, whether or not the schools had to go through ASB to, get balls or whatever it happens to be. And so, I would bring individuals in, we would look at the budgets available to them, and they were always shocked that there was millions of dollars out there in budget capacity for athletics because they were not aware that there was that level of investment into athletics. So yes, we've increased the investment going into next year. Some of it simply because costs increase, right? But also to give them some extra breathing room. But we're now going to be in excess of $3 million into athletics. And in all reality, that's secondary, right? So your middle schools and your high schools, with your middle school running a much a less expensive program because it's intramural versus competing against schools in other districts. And so the vast majority of that is actually about 2 million of it, a little over 2 million of it is actually running through the high schools. That is given out based upon the FTE in the schools. And so it's not just a one size fits all. Gig Harbor gets the exact same amount as PHS because it truly is based upon what the enrollment is, what's the participation rate in athletics. One of the things that Chris is really good about doing is actively monitoring this. And when he sees cost overruns, let's say, for example, in transportation, because that athletic budget, sort of like what Chris was talking about earlier, dozens of line items. This amount budgeted to transportation, this much about budgeted towards, athletic trainers, league dues, ref fees, whatever it happens to be. So it's separated out. So if he starts seeing cost overruns, for example, in transportation, that's something that we have very limited control on. Then ultimately, he's looking at that data and saying, okay, well, we're going to shift from, this account over here in order to offset your transportation costs, increasing that. So this is something that we closely monitor. No district should allow this to just go unchecked because athletic costs can skyrocket. And so it is something that is actively monitored to ensure that the programs have enough funding to run equitable programs. Again, this isn't about fields or field maintenance. That's not part of the athletic budget. This is truly your sports teams, whether or not they're on cycle for a uniform replacement, not on cycle for a uniform replacement, whatever it happens to be. And so we're going to be at just under 3.1 million for the upcoming year. And then we'll work with the secondary schools to either stay within that budget, or if we are seeing increases sometimes due to the tariffs right now and some things that we have to purchase, then we work through increases on that side.
I have a question about that, just real quick, because we had a board retreat recently and we kind of identified some board goals and some priorities. And so for us, a priority is to increase student participation in extracurricular activities.
Oh, great.
Including athletics. So
There we go.
So I'm just saying, I would imagine that we hopefully will see an increase. I know in our high schools, we have a pretty high rate of participation
Absolutely.
in athletics already. So I don't know that we'll see a jump in that, but given when we make our goals and our priorities, like, should be done in conjunction, I think, with budget building. So,
well, absolutely, because what I would say, and you guys are already going to know this, but from a transparency perspective, when we increase participation in athletics, your overall costs increase because we have a bargaining agreement with our coaches union, and a certain amount of students equate to one coaching stipend. And so as you increase that, we increase our coaching stipends. That's in all reality where we see the most fluctuation, because we're never going to limit our teams, like especially in the middle school area. And so you want to know what? We had enough kids coming out to want to do 5 basketball teams. No, we were going to make it a cut sport in middle school. We're trying to avoid that. So we increase the stipends in order to offset that and make sure that our students can participate. If we have the interest, we want to be able to cover it.
One other point that I want to add is that Logan mentioned music. So music is one of those programs that gets funding from multiple different buckets. Music is funded. I want to say it's solo and ensemble state competitions. They do get it's a smaller piece of the 09 athletic budgets. But that's kind of what Logan was referring to. Whereas the other music budget that I talked about earlier, that's more like local festivals and transportation for I think our elementaries to see our high schools perform and things like that. So it's just kind of an all around program enhancement, I guess, for music.
Athletics covers WIA covered programming. And so, like what both Logan and Chris was stating, is there are 2 music groups, and I'm not super savvy on that side, so I'm not going to try to guess their actual names, that are covered under WIA. So because of that, their fees, their league fees and stuff associated with going to state and all is covered under the athletics budget. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, we're good.
Our next slide that we wanted to point out was our community use. This is things like allowing our facilities to be used, our soccer fields, our football fields, things like that. And an important thing to note with the community use fund and all those facilities is it's not designed for us to be taking a profit. Any dollars that we bring in through this program will be spent on things like maintenance, keeping the lights on, and things purely associated with that community use and the cost associated with that. So for our revenues, we are projecting a budgeted increase of $120,000 from 501 to $620,000. Our expenditures are expected to increase alongside that from $480,000 and $570 to $579,000. For the 26-27 proposed budget, we are projecting a surplus, you could say, of $41,000, but we want to make it very clear that in our internal systems, all those dollars are earmarked. They're coming in under program 89 specifically, and they're going to be expended through that program.
We can't budget for a negative value because guess what that is? A gift of public funds. Okay. So ultimately, and because you can see that it's been budgeted for a pretty large increase in revenues, I wanted to leave a higher difference there because if we don't hit that, I can't have that program hit the negative because then at that point we're considered gifting. So, and also like this year in July, when we put the facility fee schedule before the board in the consent agenda, there was not increases in your general rental fee schedule for, class A, B, C, D, anything like that. So we kept the rates the same on that side. The only thing that had increased is we had groups approach us that wanted to be able to continue to rent percussion type instruments. There wasn't a fee schedule associated with it, so we put a nominal fee schedule associated with that rental within the agreement. And so this is one of the ones that has been hotly debated over, in all reality, the last several years. This district would be in serious audit trouble if we as a municipality were running a for-profit rental agency. We cannot do it. Our expenditures out are highly scrutinized. Oh, you got 12 Sani cans. Where did you put them? Oh, they're located next to all of these fields. Oh, and it's cyclical. You're bringing them in baseball season. So this is something that Adrian, who's our facilities coordinator for that, I mean, I get put on emails all the time where she's emailing Chris saying, you want to know what? I don't think that community use piece was 50% of the utility bill for those lights. I think it was actually 30%. So I think you need to take an additional, 20% and shift it into a different program. And so between her and Chris, like they have this locked down so that truly the revenues that are coming in are going back out to offset the cost of the facilities being utilized. Another good example for this is summer is a huge soccer time frame, okay? Soccer players wear cleats. Cleats tear up grass fields. Okay, this is just factual. I'm not saying anything to hurt anyone's feelings or anything, but it's the case. So we've been taking fields off use because we're doing a ton of renovations in fields and grass needs time to heal. And so we had a group approach us and they're like, look, we need another field for the younger kids to play these soccer games. Could you give us the outfield of PHS? Okay, because we closed the PHS baseball field for renovations. And so the grass field area was looking superb. Okay, it was amazing. I got before pictures. And then just literally one weekend of games, drive by it. You can see exactly where the goals were. You can see exactly where the players were standing. It's just, and that's from a week, and so ultimately there's costs associated now with going in overseeding. Okay. Do we need to drop sand? Do we need to drop fertilizer, whatever it happens to be in order to get the field back up to playable status? And so this is something that we do scrutinize, that we do look at on a regular basis in order to ensure that we are not breaking the law by running a for-profit rental agency as a municipality but that we're also not breaking a law of gifting of public funds, because we have to sit right there between both of those places and make sure that we are doing the best we can with the resources that we have and the revenues that are coming in to meet the needs of all of our constituents, everyone who, pays in to see this district be what it is. So, yeah.
Okay, next is curriculum. We've already kind of touched on curriculum during this presentation, but again, you'll see $0 budgeted for revenues. We don't receive funding explicitly for curriculum, new curriculum adoptions. It's a levy priority for us. So last year, we budgeted $2,041,000. This year, we're budgeting $2,159,000. So increasing that budget amount by $117,000. But if you look at our curriculum, it's pretty robust. We are really investing in new curriculum that's proven to be
Based
successful.
upon the science of reading and specific math standards that have buy-in from our educators and through approval of the board, but it is tough.
Yep. And these dollar figures also include the professional development for new curriculum. You adopt new curriculum, you can't just expect teachers to know how to take that curriculum and implement it into the classroom. So that's where professional development comes through. I think I just approved 4 or 5 different POs today for training sessions on the new math curriculum. So again, this is an investment that this district is making in our students, and we're confident that we're going to see positive outcome.
And with that being said, and I know some of you guys have heard this before, when I came to this district and I asked for a curriculum replacement cycle, okay, and this is different staff, okay, this is different time ago, okay, but I asked for a curriculum replacement cycle, they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, well, when's your next adoption? Well, we haven't had money for that. And so we were already out of date with a lot of the curriculum, hence the back-to-back adoptions to get us in 21st century curriculum that is based upon, peer-reviewed research that it's going to be successful, and then investing in the professional development so our staff actually know what the best practices are for teaching and catering to our individual student needs. And so again, it is a heavy commitment on that side. And I'm not saying when we say curriculum, this isn't the teaching and learning budget. The teaching and learning budget is higher than $2.1 million. This is literally curriculum. So this is either new adoptions, supplemental materials, reoccurring costs, anything like that coming in at 2.1.
Okay, my favorite. Total building level budget. So you may hear the term building budget thrown around quite a bit. This is how much we allocate as a district to our buildings for them to make decisions with at the building level. So a small portion is the principal's discretion that they can use at just their discretion, but a large majority of these budgeted expenditures are discussed at the BLT level. So that's teachers. This next year, there will be a classified member on that team, but the principals are included in those meetings. The BLTs at each building make decisions on their priorities as a building, and then they move forward with their spending plans. So in 25-26, there was just under $3 million budgeted. In 26-27, $3,364,000, so an increase of nearly $400,000 that we're funneling directly to the buildings. Some of the specific increases include an additional $56,000 for 5th grade camp. Our elementaries go to Camp Seymour. Last year we budgeted $50,000. That wasn't enough. So this year we budgeted a set amount per 5th grade class at each building. So it's not one size fits all. Buildings with 2 5th grade classes receive a little bit less funding than buildings with 4 5th grade. I don't think we have any with 4. With 3.5
We do.
5th grade. Okay.
But what that is saying, so any of our PTO, PTA parents out there that have elementary kids, this has been a hotly discussed item. We are doing $4,000 per fifth grade class. So every single one of our schools, to include schools that only have 2 fifth grade classes, are going to see an increase, because instead of 5,000, they're going to get 8,000 to help offset that cost. And in our bigger schools, Swiftwater, Pioneer, Purdy, that had 4 to 5 fifth grade classes, they're going to see an increase on that side as well to help offset the total cost of camp. So although we say, hey, this is in the building budget, spend it towards fifth grade camp, we're not telling them how to spend it on fifth grade camp. Some of them want swimming. Great. Some of them want arts and crafts. Go for it. Whatever it happens to be, it's just we want that money being dedicated to fifth grade camp, and then the fifth grade team, the building admin turns around and decides how they're going to spend that. And I know that our PTAs and PTOs are heavily involved in that process at the elementary level. So that's some good news for fifth grade camp. Basically, it's being budgeted at $106,000 for the upcoming school year versus the $50,000 from prior year.
Another big chunk of that increase it was a levy priority this past year is classroom furniture. That's something that I've heard from buildings. They get a hold of me and they say, hey, I had 3 desks break this last week. How do I pay for that? Well, you have to utilize your building budget. So in the levy, we broke out a separate line for equipment and classroom furniture. This next year, there's $265,000 set aside just for classroom furniture. This isn't front office furniture. This isn't the principal's office. This is classrooms where students are learning. It's dedicated solely for that. A couple other areas where there were increases, we increased music education, and this is actually, I believe, included in that music figure, is $22,000 additional funding for music, $20,000 additional for instructional materials, so that's those school supplies, and then $74,000 for technology repairs and replacements. That's going to be a big topic with the MacBook Neos. Tech went and invested in some cases for those, and
Robust cases.
they say that they took a few of their laptops through the ringer and they're really, really protective. So hopefully that comes to fruition and we don't see a lot of repairs needed. Do you have anything else to add? Building budget.
So with building budget, again, sort of like what we talked about, like even on the music slide. So these are dollars that we are funneling to the buildings making decisions on how they're going to spend it. The district does not tell them how to spend it. And one of the things that Chris and I both do, like we go out to our building leadership teams, our built teams, we have conversations regarding budget, all of that. And one of the things we tell them at the end of the day, even though there's subcategories for these budgets, let's say, instructional materials is a sub-budget of their building budget. And then they also have just a basic education budget available. Let's say they overspend in their instructional materials or they overspend in their basic education. No harm, no foul. Guess what? It all funnels to the exact same program code. All we're doing is sub-accounting for it so that from an equity, and it's based upon per student allocation. It's just equity-based. You send it out based upon that. And then the building is the one that gets together and decides how it's going to be spent on that year's staff and that year's students, because there is not carryover of these amounts because it's not a savings account. We want the money being spent on this year's kids and this year's staff. The only thing that actually carries over is their donation account, because when a donation comes in, we need to be spending it on the intent of the donation. That's the only thing that carries over. Everything else comes in and it's going to be spent on this year's students. One of the other things I want to note is if you look at the levy priority list, you're going to see a dollar value higher than $265,000 for furniture. Any guess why? Levies are based upon calendar years. The budget is based upon a fiscal year. That is half of the allocation. Okay? So the buildings already know that in 28, that they will receive double the allocation. It's just this year they received half of the allocation because that is what we are going to be receiving on that side. Also, how we distributed that funding, if you're in a new building and you have new furniture, you received a lower, more nominal investment. If you're in an older building, you received more because the fact of the matter is that your furniture is going to have been replaced a lot longer than some of our new buildings. But we still gave everyone something because there's still some wins that they can get by investing in new furniture.
Awesome. So this is our high school CTE. This is very our career and technical education. It's very exciting. For our student FTE, we have it budgeted based on last year's actuals at 542. And remember, for CTE FTE, it's important to remember that a student who only has 2 out of maybe 6 of their classes being CTE, they're only being put into that 542 number as a partial FTE, which means that the actual number of students that we're impacting through our CTE programs is much higher. That's just how the state funds it at that full-time equivalency number. For revenues, we are seeing an increase from just over $6 million to just over $6.2 million, an increase of $170,000. At the same time, our revenues are seeing a decrease from expected from actual $6.3 million to just under $5.9 million, and part of that is just CTE is a hard program to actually budget and project out for because it is based on the actual attendance in those CTE classes. And you can have things maybe, first week of school, a kid has a blank slot in their schedule, they get put in a CTE class, that affects this. Or if there's, a class that doesn't have enough students to run, gets taken out. If that's a CTE class, it also impacts this. So it's just one of those things that's really hard to predict until the school year actually starts. So that's us budgeting conservatively with that 5.87 number, especially when you look at actuals today where we did slightly over expend the program at a difference of $274,000 for the 25-26 actual. This next year, we're projecting to be in surplus at $328,000, and that is restricted for carryover for the CTE program. So that's all going to get expended eventually.
That does include payroll and benefits and any of their MSOC supplies and all of that kind of stuff. It's all embedded in there. This is, so you just discussed high school, now you're going to discuss middle.
Yeah. So our middle school, we are seeing our FTE at 111 based on an annual average of 110.9 for last year. This keeps our revenues pretty stable, a slight increase from $1.23 million to $1.27 million in revenues. For this program, because it's less variable due to it being a smaller amount of students, we basically budget it based on our projected revenues, which for last year were $1.16 million, and we're just matching those projected expenditures at the 1.27 number for the 26-27 proposed budget, leaving us with a slight deficit of $275 this next year.
And with that to be noted, Logan talked about it, and you guys may have missed what he actually said. He said the terms restricted for carryover. So in these type of categorical programs, when we're talking about fund balanced allocation, in a categorical program like CTE, you can only spend the money in CTE. So if you end the year with a $70,000 surplus, we have to budget to carry that over into the following year in a specific set aside program. And then what that does is help offset the next year cost. So even though you're seeing a deficit of 275 right now, based upon just true revenues and expenditures, we already know that we're going to be sitting on a $70,000 carryover for the program that can help offset any type of deficit we have. And then also, like what Logan was saying, that the beginning of the school year, when we're doing those first 5-day counts, we're doing it at high school. So we're looking at our CTE enrollment in our classrooms. And when we start having conversations about we didn't get enough enrollment in, this class, there was only 2 students that selected it. Is it a CTE course? Did any students select it as a secondary? What can we do on that side? So CTE is a program, because it's one of our only amply funded state programs, that we really scrutinize both through the enrollment process and during our first 5-day counts to ensure that a reduction in enrollment in that program is not going to tank your budget.
question on that. Expenditures went up just under 10%, but we didn't increase FTE. Why does the cost go up so much?
The vast majority of it ends up being MSOC supplies. So in our CTE classes, especially when you're dealing with woodworking and like jewelry making and all of these kind of stuff, they're highly consumable classes. So one of the things that we find is that if we end up with cost overruns, it tends to not be in salary and benefits, especially because this district has a lot of what's called position control. We don't add staff arbitrarily. We add staff based upon enrollment numbers. Where we see the largest fluctuation is in MSOCs, so supply requests. One of the things Kelsey Park, our CTE director, does in the spring is she surveys the CTE teachers on what they're needing for the upcoming school year. What type of supplies, do they have inventory, all of those pieces to determine what the baseline is going to be that's necessary for the start of the school year. And so when we start seeing cost increases, even in a perfect example this year is culinary arts. We all felt the grocery prices, you guys. Okay, the district felt the grocery prices. Our culinary arts teachers, we open a purchase order for them to go and purchase the items necessary for culinary arts. We increased that one countless times this year because ultimately the grocery prices just kept increasing, and it's not like we can not go buy the groceries for culinary arts. And so it's just cost overruns. We end up having to pay. It's the same with wood. So as wood costs were skyrocketing, it's not like the students aren't going to do the projects. We just have to absorb the cost. So to be conservative, we budget higher on that MSOC side in order to be able to offset those cost overruns, because let's just say hypothetically we were not to spend it. Let's say groceries get reasonably priced at some point. It's possible, maybe. Then at that point, no harm, no foul. You don't spend those dollars because they didn't need it for the classroom, and then it becomes carryover that's reserved for the program for the next year.
Okay, I believe this is our last program individual slide. So the transportation program, this is to from transportation. In 25-26, we budgeted $7.4 million in revenues, $8.1 million in expenditures. In 26-27, budgeted revenues went up to $7.8 million. Expenditures actually went down to just under $8 million. So a decrease of about $130,000. And this is a program where we see cost overruns pretty regularly year over year, and it is trued up in February based on the STARS formula, which nobody knows really what goes into it, how it works. Yeah. So this year we kind of trend our data to be somewhat similar as the prior year. This one isn't considered part of basic education. So when Ashley's talking about program 01 or basic education, CTE is a separate program. Transportation is program 99. So it's a completely separate budget. And anything that impacts basic education, such as transportation to a band festival or transportation to athletic events, there's a process that I do on a monthly basis where I'm taking expenditures, salaries and benefits, fuel costs from program 99, and I'm moving it to the athletics program. So there's a lot of moving parts in transportation that can cause it to be, I guess, overfunded or underfunded. Yeah, this and another thing to add, part of the STARS calculation is, and this especially impacts our district, is transportation is funded in a straight line. It's funded as the crow flies. So our district, there's a lot of water between the Peninsula and Gig Harbor, and the state funds us as if we were able to drive over water. So we aren't the most efficient district in terms of the STARS formula. So that's another reason why we tend to see these cost overruns.
They also fund us a year behind. And so this year in 25-26, and so right now, Chris and I and a lot of our business staff, we're working in 2 years, our HR staff as well. So when I say this year, I'm still talking about school year 25-26. So this year we were funded based upon our expenses for 24-25. And so in 26-27, we're going to be funded based upon our expenses in 25-26. And so ultimately you have to eat the cost, because that's the only way that you're going to increase the revenues coming in the door, is by, you want to know what? Fuel costs increase, bargain salaries increase. You're just going to have to go with it. Now, we did reduce a non-represented transportation supervisor position. That technically wasn't because we were trying to cut this deficit, but sort of like what I said earlier is we had an individual leave mid-year. Anytime we have an individual leave mid-year, you guys, we scrutinize it. Like, do you absolutely need this position right now? Is there work that can be offset by, a more efficient process, by turning something electronic? Is that position doing a lot of touching of paper, which is one of my pet peeves? If you tell me yes, I already know that the efficiencies that we can create would eliminate a portion of the hours associated with that position. So this was a perfect example. Donette came to me. Donette's our transportation director, said so-and-so has resigned. I said, what's your ideas for the position? And I said, are you wanting to post? And she goes, I think I have a solution. And what her solution was, and it was a genius solution, was she has 2 non-represented dispatcher routers. And she said, I want to combine their job description. They're both unbelievably capable individuals that can take this piece that this transportation supervisor was doing. We simply pay those individuals, a little bit more to cover it. It doesn't come anywhere near what the actual cost of the FTE was. They'll be happy. Department's happy. We're good to go. And it's like, great. I love those solutions. Because ultimately, just because we know a program is likely going to always be in a cost overrun status, we don't want to just accept that as status quo and continue to move with that. We look for those areas where we can become more efficient and cut costs.
One last point. This is transportation operations. We'll have a little bit more. We'll have a couple slides on the transportation vehicle fund, which is that's used to purchase buses. This is just operations, like Ashley said, salaries and benefits, fuel, what it takes to get the bus down the road.
Does this include like the bus app?
Yes.
Yeah.
Goes into this? Okay.
Yep. That's the operational, like MSOC cost associated with that. Because one of the other things that a vast majority of individuals are not aware, transportation is not in Program 01 for a reason. Because the state does not consider transportation to and from school a basic education right. Hence the reason they don't have to fund us for what our costs actually are. The only caveat to that is there is legislation that states if a student has an IEP or is special education and has mobility issues, or the parent has mobility issues that would physically render them incapable of getting the student to school, we are required to fund that transportation for special education. We're required to fund all special education transportation, but only students that have a direct connection in their IEP that absolutely need that transportation, or they would not otherwise be able to make it to school. All of the rest of the transportation that we do is not directed by the state, funded by the state. A district could 100% cut transportation and would not be contacted by the state. Now you're going to impact your enrollment, because how are you going to, and that's why you see these districts that have levy failures, they don't cut their transportation, even though it's not being funded at that manner, because they cut the transportation, the kids aren't going to come to school. So that is one of the misconceptions out there, is that, well, it's a basic education right. You have to fund fully transportation. You have to pick my kid up at my front door. None of that is a thing unless you hit a small, minute population of the students that have IEPs with direct connection for transportation associated with it.
Awesome. So this is just a broad overview of all of our general fund expenditures broken down by object. So our biggest expenditures is going to be our salaries. At the top, you see certificated salaries at 78 million. classified salaries for all of our our non-certificated staff at just over 33 million. Employee benefits, which match those at just under $35 million. Supplies, 12.7 million. Purchase services, 23.6 million. Travel, 476,000, and capital outlay for things that can't be capitalized at 715,000, leaving us with a total general fund expenditures of $183,970,297, up roughly $5.2 million from the prior year budget.
And so when we say budget, so sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, when a district talks budget, this is the number they're talking about. This is what budget authority is based upon, is your total expenditure capacity. So the state doesn't care if your certificated salaries came in at 60 million and your classified salaries came in at 40 million, as long as you did not spend one fraction of a penny over that $183 million number. If you spend a penny over and you do not come back to the board for basically a budget revision process that is then adopted by the board, you get in trouble and it's not good. And you end up with audit issues.
We just have a quick chart of those prior slide expenditures. Cert salaries are at 41.9%, employee benefits at 19.8%, classified salaries at 18.1%, purchase services at 12.7%, supplies at 6.9%, capital outlay at 0.5%, and travel at 0.2%. In total, the salaries and benefits portion of the expenditures represent 79.57%. This basically means for every dollar that the district spends, about 79.5 cents of that goes into our salaries and benefits, and that's kind of a good a middle ground percent between actually spending money on extremely qualified teachers and staff, and also spending directly on things like your MSOCs, your supplies, and things that benefit students in other ways.
Investing in rigorous programming. This is a number that you guys have heard me say multiple times. Keep it at 80-20. And again, I think I talked a few board meetings ago, WASBO legislative priorities. An individual went in and calculated my math against all districts that went into binding conditions over basically the last 4 years and found that I was accurate. And so now the WASBO priority is going to set forth, although I couldn't get them to 80% because they said that it would have taken multiple districts and immediately put them into binding conditions. We are going to start with a threshold of 85%. So that is what we are going to be proposing legislatively, that we want them to create rulemaking stating that your salaries and benefits cannot exceed 85% before putting you on a watch list. At which point you're going to need additional monitoring, because ultimately, if when I got here, you guys were at 85% and you were anticipating to go to 87% that next year. And so ultimately what we do is we invest in rigorous programming for students, and that is a priority, but you have to have the money to do so. And if you have it all capped in salaries and benefits, you don't have the money to do the curriculum adoptions, to do the curriculums, to do the school supplies, to run cost overruns in CTE, whatever it happens to be. And so we continually strive for an 80-20 split. And even this year, while they were building out the budget, we were going back and forth. Julie Mondry, who is our Director of Employee Support Services, working with Chris on the payroll, HR side of the budget, funneling numbers back and forth. And I just kept asking him, what percent are we at? What percent are we at? And then finally, Chris is like, we're here. And I was like, yes. Because ultimately, I do the rough math and say, this is where we're going to be. I need us to stay within this number of FTE, right? And then they go behind the scenes and make the magic happen. And sure enough, we came in at just under 80%, which is exactly where we want to be with everything.
Awesome. The next slide is another slide that we didn't have last year. This is a different way of breaking down our general fund expenditures, basically into object regarding what are based on activity. I'm sorry. So this slide, what I'll tell you is things like what percent is going to our teaching activities, our teaching support, other support activities, building admin, and our central admin at like our district office. And this is something that's brought up a lot at things like board meetings or district events. Specifically, when looking at the budget are teaching activities. This is things like the teachers themselves that ends up being 55.9%. Teaching support is 14.1%. Other support activities, so things like curriculum or things like tech and just things that overall help.
Food service, transportation.
Yeah, all the things that we need to actually educate our kids is 17.6%. And then your building admin, like your office staff and your principals, is 6.2%. And then central admin, people who work, at the district office, is also 6.2%. So if you sum those up, our non-administrative costs end up being 87.6%, which is basically, 87 cents on the dollar is going directly into educating students, and then the rest is going into the management of all those resources.
And so this is something that I wanted to specifically put out there because we hear it quite regularly. A district is, admin heavy. They're paying administrators too much. There's not enough money going into the classroom. So on a very transparent basis, we just wanted to say, this is what it is. 6 cents on the dollar going to individuals that are running your buildings at the building level. 6 cents on the dollar going to the individuals that run the district at a district level, the business that's running $270 million and 1,400 employees. 6 cents on the dollar. 87.6 cents on the dollar going to educating the students in the classroom, getting the students to school, feeding the students. So, and this data literally came directly from our F-195. So if you're wanting to look at those percentages, they are outlined specifically within the budget. Those are the exact percentages there. I tried to snip the piece from the budget. The budget's not a very pretty document, and then it squished my graph and you couldn't read it. So I just decided I'd reference it. So that's what we are looking at, though, as far as the actual cost. And when I say T&L, I'm talking about teaching and learning. So I'm talking about everything that it takes to make sure that our students are learning in a classroom versus the administration of that work. Okay. This is the one slide that I told them that I would just start from the get-go. I am not going to read this, but I wanted to put all this information out there. A school district budgeting process, financial statements, again, we are still a business and we still have to operate by specific accounting practices on how we reserve funds or restrict funds or commit funds and what level of the organization of the district has to be involved in order to do certain things. And so you can see that there are 5 different fund balance. The FB just is fund balance, you guys. 5 different fund balance classifications that a district can commit or reserve or unassign fund balance to. Now, some things are like your non-spendable fund balance. Unless you're paying people with toilet paper, you're not going to be able to spend your non-spendable fund balance. So when we have inventory, and whether or not it's food service inventory, cans of peaches or paper towels, it is booked as non-spendable. When we, in the accounting world, book a prepaid item, meaning we're taking in curriculum for next year, but the students aren't learning from it right now, we're going to book it as a prepaid so we can expense it. Or code it as a prepaid. It's being coded as an asset at that point. All expense it out in the 26-27 school year. It removes it from your non-spendable fund balance, moves it into the your unassigned fund balance through expenditure category at that point. So this is very technical, very accountant type knowledge. But ultimately, what I wanted to put out there was there is a lot of restrictions on what we can do. And how we have to account for remaining dollars. You've heard us talk about restricted for carryover. So in CTE or in TK or in special education, if you have carryover dollars, the district can't be like, yay, we profited off this, now go use it over here. We restrict it through a separate line item, and we have to continue to spend it only in that program. So those are the examples, and this will sort of hit a little bit on that next slide when you see our fund balance makeup.
Okay, so we talked through everything general fund. Here's a quick summary. Our estimated beginning fund balance, which matches what we estimate to end 25-26 at, is just over $10 million. Our revenues, which you saw on the revenue summary slide, $181,823,000. Our expenditures, $183,970,000, puts us at an estimated ending fund balance of just under $7.9 million. The restricted ending fund balance, we're planning on spending all of those restricted dollars throughout the year. Our unreserved or unrestricted balance is that full amount. And then the fund balance percentage is the ending fund balance divided by our total expenditures. Board goal is 4 to 6%. We came in at 4.28%. And then there is a little note down there at the bottom. The 7.8 million that's unreserved or unrestricted contains 1 million of assigned funds, and that's board assigned funds from way back.
A while ago, David. I think you and I talked about it. It was a while ago, and so it's still sitting out there. You wouldn't have to take board, and if you go back to the other slide, you'll see why I put it in there. You wouldn't have to pass a resolution to unassign those funds. Now, mind you, we don't have a fund balance of less than $1 million. It's not really pertinent right now. But like if the board at some point were to be like, look, we're good, just take the assignment of those funds off the book, because David can provide more rationale as to why it was assigned at that time, then we can unassign it. But from a budgetary process, until you guys either tell us to unassign it or you give Creston the authority to unassign it, they will remain assigned to. I know. So big different process. I believe at the time you guys had it assigned for some type of specific contingency or something like that. There you go. It wouldn't fix the roof nowadays. So, but either way, it's still sitting out there. It's not a horrible thing, but we can always revisit conversation regarding fund balance. One of the things that I will tell you guys is that the WASBO Legislative Committee, part of our levy priority is a list of things that we would like the state to put out there as far as fence posts for school district financial operations. One of those being requiring a minimum fund balance. Right now, the state does not legislatively require anything for a minimum fund balance, other than you can't be negative $1 because then you'll go into binding condition. If you're anything other than that, you're good to go, even if you had to borrow the funds in order to have a positive ending fund balance, which is what we're seeing with some of these districts. So what we did in the WASBO Legislative Committee is we created different thresholds. So if you're a really small school district and you have 50 full-time equivalent enrollment, stating that you need to have a 4% fund balance is going to do you nothing, because now you have $30,000. Guess what? You're getting nowhere on that roof collapse with $30,000. So we set it based upon size of school, and either put a minimum dollar value that it needed to be for like a really small remote school, or a minimum percentage based upon whether or not you're a district of this size FTE to this size. So there's a threshold. So more information will be coming in regards to that. We currently sit at 4.28%, but you guys, this is my 5th budget presentation with you guys. I budget conservatively. I budget as in if everything came to fruition, all of Ashley's, well, what if this occurred, happened, we will still be sitting on 4.28%, okay? Very conservative budgeting process that I utilize. So that's why even currently, you are seeing that we budgeted to end 25-26 at 7.4. And where does it look like we're going to start? 10 million. Okay? Because I budget for worst case. And then if something comes in better than that, great. I can now add it back in because the dollars are real. The vast majority of the revenues that you're seeing throughout these budgets, we do not pick. When we do that F203 calculator, the enrollment revenue calculator, when you put in your enrollment, it says your transportation allocation is X. Your CTE allocation is X. Your MMLL, your transitional bilingual program is X. It gives us all those dollar values, so we're not creating them. We take those, plug them into the budget, and then from there, what we're budgeting as far as revenues are the ones that are not directed by the state. They've either come in from the federal government, their local levy priority, in which we're utilizing our levy spending plan. That's where we plug in the gaps. So again, like you saw on the other slides where we have almost 75-ish% of our budget coming in from the state, that 75% of the revenues, we were already told, you will get X in this category. You will get X in this category. So we plug all of that in, and then if there's a mid-year legislative change, obviously we didn't budget for that because we didn't know there was going to be, and there's a positive gain, like the year that we saw the one-time influx of MSOC, great, positive dollars. When they take stuff away mid-year that we did not budget for, now there's negative connotation associated with that. And so this truly is, and by saying worst case scenario, you guys, this is a really good budget. There are so many areas in this budget that are considered, that other districts right now would consider just complete surplus of funding, but we have the ability to do it because we have the ability to invest in our current staffing kids. And that's what we should be doing. But again, yes, worst case scenario, but in all reality, this is a really, really, really good and solid budget. And you can tell because of the 80-20 split. That is always the marker of whether or not you feel like you're going to be short or you're not. Okay.
So this was our last general fund slide. Are there any questions before we move on?
The other slides are super quick.
Yes.
And I'm sure you guys are gonna have a ton of, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so next is a capital projects fund. Just like it kind of sounds like, it's meant to fund capital projects. The revenue sources that we bring in are state matching funds, and we just have a small amount of state matching funds left to claim from the 2019 bond and those projects. We spend bond dollars and then we submit invoices to the state, and they provide a percentage of matching funds. So I want to say that's 100,000 or 200,000, somewhere in that ballpark. Impact fees, and we receive impact fees from the city of Gig Harbor and from the county. Those fees are to be used to add classroom space. They're received on new developments, new housing, because of, like it kind of says, the impact that new housing will have on your school building. Local levy for safety, security, and technology. That levy amount is higher than the transfer that I budget. We do spend some of those dollars out of the capital projects fund on buildings that are related to safety, security. Most of the tech comes from the general fund and it's reimbursed. And then our last revenue source is interest on our fund balance. I want to say that amounts roughly 300,000, but as we spend those dollars down, we'll receive less interest. Expenditure projects that are budgeted for next year. There's the turf field, the lower Gig Harbor, and that one, it was budgeted in last year's budget. However, the project isn't expected to be completed until October. You don't pay those invoices fully until it's completed, so I had to budget some of the expenses in there. Now what that means is the expenditures for 25-26 aren't going to be as high because they won't be paid out. So that fund balance carries over to next year. Other projects, there's water systems. So a district water plan, and then a Kopachuk water upgrade, or Kopachuk water upgrades. HVAC controls at multiple buildings, field reconditionings, and then other spending aligned with the SS&T plan, such as building out security vestibules at some of our schools. I know some of our schools, you open the front door and you can get to the kids. So creating an area that is secure to where we can lock it down if anything should occur is directly in line with that plan.
You will see that these expenditure projects are completely different than any budget that you've seen from 2019 to current. So you're not seeing KPMS and Kopachuk and, Swiftwater, all of that. We have some remaining dollars left. We looked at it. We looked at what high value projects are left in this district, and took that dollar value. And you can go through the F-195. You'll see how it's been spread out. But we've set aside funding to start or complete these projects here with the remaining capital projects funds that we do have.
Okay. And then here's just a quick summary. Like Ashley said, this is much quicker. There's only 2 slides on capital projects fund, so ask your questions after I get through this if you have them. Estimated beginning fund balance is 8.4 million. Revenues in the capital projects fund is 7.7 million. Expenditures and transfers, that's the SS&T transfers to the general fund, amount to $15.8 million. And then estimated ending fund balance is 371,000. Of that, if you go back to, if you go back to Ashley's slide on the fund balances, you'll see the same terminology. Committed levy proceeds are committed to things outlined in the levy plan. Restricted state match funds, they're restricted revenues that come from the state. Restricted impact fees, again, that's restricted to only projects that add classroom space. And then assigned to fund purposes, which just means assigned to capital projects.
One thing I will note on this is you're seeing the word committed levy proceeds on capital projects, but you did not see it on general fund because there's RCW. So when you're running a levy under capital projects, you're running a levy in lieu of a bond. When you run a bond initiative, what you tell the community that they are getting with that bond, you have to go out and do. So if you say, we're rebuilding this elementary school, you're going and rebuilding that elementary school. You tell them you're going to get this new elementary school in a new stadium, you need to pony up a new elementary school in a new stadium. So the rules governing capital projects fund and how you commit the levy proceeds for that are much different than in a general fund where it's an educational programs and operations levy. And what the RCW requirements are that you spend it only on enrichment activities, but they do not mandate that you spend your levy fund specific to the levy spending plan that you got adopted. It's just bad business not to do it, though.
Okay, any questions? Perfect. I'm going to pass it off to Logan to do the debt service fund.
Awesome. So in the debt service fund, this is used for the repayment of principal and interest on our outstanding bonds. And the primary revenue source is just directly from taxes, taxes levied annually to cover the amortization schedule. That's a big word. Okay. On the next slide, you'll see on the next slide, you'll see the breakdown of the debt service fund, just in line with our schedule for 26-27. The proposed budget, or the estimated beginning fund balance is $9.3 million. The revenues are just under $12.5 million. Expenditures are $11.8 million, and our estimated ending fund balance is at just over $10 million. Of that, $5.5 million is paying the principal, and 6.25 is coming from paying interest. Is from the interest payments on the bonds, and then a very small number, the 10,000, is for the bond transfer fees. And Ashley can go more in depth on this, but the reason we actually hold such a high beginning and ending fund balance is just due to the nature of how we pay the bond. Based on the calendar year, not the school fiscal year.
Exactly. We need money in the bank in order to make our first payment in the start of the school year. And if you're starting with $0, you're going to go defunct on your first payment. So.
Awesome. So the next fund is the Associated Student Body Fund, or the ASB fund, and this is just directly for board approved ASBs at the individual schools, and it's basically run, each one has their individual ASB. The ASB gives the bookkeeper a budget, they review it, they send it to us, and then we combine all those into a district level ASB. But this is purely run by the students and for the students.
As in, when they give us their budget, we don't go through and say, you want to know what? We don't think you're going to bring in that many revenues. So if they come in and say, we're going to bring in $3 million worth of revenue, we're like, go get them. Yeah, that's right. Okay, $3 million. Next, we just let them do it because that's part of what being in the leadership class is about, is you're learning all that process. And hey, you have a group one year that's really out there and you're going to do a lot of fundraising or whatever it happens to be. We will completely take those numbers, throw it into your ASB budget, and you want to know what? It's a budget. If it doesn't come to fruition, so be it.
So on the next slide, you'll see the combination of the entire ASB fund from all the middle and high schools. And for the 26-27 proposed budget, our estimated beginning fund balance is $1.746 million. Our revenues are $2.36 million. Our expenditures are just under $3.4 million, spending down the fund balance, leaving us with a bit over $700,000.
The vast majority of this balance in all reality is the 2 high schools. That's exactly right. Correct. Exactly.
Even the interest that is earned on the fund balance, we go through and there's a monthly process where we bring in roughly $6,000 a month on this balance. I go through and allocate like $1,800 to Gig Harbor, $1,800 to PHS. Their balances are pretty close. And then the 4 middle schools make up the majority of the rest of it. So even the interest in this goes directly to those buildings. They can budget what to do with it, what if they want to transfer those funds to certain clubs to fund activities, that's on them.
Yeah, basically what Chris is saying is, if Gig Harbor has 20% of the outstanding fund balance, they're going to get 20% of the interest. Okay. And then our last fund is the Transportation Vehicle Fund. This is a very interesting fund. Basically, it's used for purchasing new and used yellow school buses, and more recently, the legislature did give us some added use for this fund, which is that we can buy vehicles that are used for point A to point B, to and from movement of students for district programs.
And that means to and from school. Okay, so we could go out and purchase a 9-seater van and utilize that to go pick up some students and bring them to school. This is not going to benefit us, okay, but it will benefit some more rural, smaller school districts. And in all reality, one of the things that it could be used for is McKinney-Vento transportation. So you have, a set of 3 students, their home burns down in Gig Harbor. They have to temporarily relocate to Tacoma. We, by law, are still required now to transport them back to school over here, in whichever schools they were. But I don't have a bus route that goes to Tacoma. There's multiple ways you can go about doing it. I can contract with Tacoma School District in order for them to, let's say, provide the transportation to our schools in the morning, and then we transport back, and then I pay Tacoma School District. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it. One of their solutions was go out and buy some vans and transport the kids that way. I would need drivers, though. So it doesn't solve that issue. Therefore, I don't see it being super useful to us here in Peninsula. But it was a new change as of this last legislative session.
Yeah, and the vast majority of the revenue in this fund comes from the depreciation schedule provided by the state for all of our school buses and support vehicles.
Which they also very nicely reduced for us in the last legislative session.
Just very slightly. Yeah, so for the beginning fund balance, we are expecting $2.86 million. Our revenues are going to be lower than last year by about $200,000 because of that legislative change. And that leaves us with revenues of $992,000, expenditures of $3.85 million, and an estimated ending fund balance of $11,852, in part just because we want to make sure this fund has the capacity to spend the dollars it has.
And ultimately, what we're looking at with this, Donette does an amazing job making sure that she's replacing our buses on a specific replacement cycle so that we don't get into a situation where we have 10 buses falling off the depreciation schedule, because then your only set revenue is decreasing significantly. So then how are you going to replace your school buses? And so she's done a really good job surplusing. When we get a bus off depreciation schedule, we go out there, we buy the new bus, and we keep running through this process. She's also done a really good job getting us some federal level EPA grants in order to go propane. I want to say she just quoted recently that about a third of our fleet is running on propane right now, which during these fuel spikes has been hugely advantageous for us. We actually are running, knock on wood, but running at a surplus in our fuel budget right now. And that's partly why, because we way over budgeted because we knew that the fuel costs were going to go sky high. And so that's one of the things that she's actively continuing to go for, is those propane buses. They run cleaner, they're cheaper to maintain, and the fuel costs are cheaper.
So that's also part of why you see, if you noticed, our adopted budget last year has us estimated to end at 110,000. Yet next year we're starting at 2.9 million almost. That's due to Donette's management of the fleet, and there wasn't the need to purchase buses this year, so we just roll dollars forward, and I'm gonna guess there's gonna be a purchase order coming through for a few buses in the next few months.
It's also about what's available. The tariffs really impacted the bus market. And so ultimately what ends up happening is, even if you put in an order for a school bus, it wasn't being filled. Like in some situations, sadly enough, I heard that some school districts were waiting over a year, and then the bus companies weren't honoring the original purchase price because of the time lapse and all of that. So again, Donette being a nationwide leader in transportation, she's the first one to get information, because I mean, she was the president of the National Transportation Association for school districts. And so the second she'd get information, she'd advocate for or against, and then pass on all the information to us. And so we've been reaping the benefits of that when it comes to that fund.
So with that, we have completed our presentation going through all the budgets. This is just for the board. This is just a first reading, so I don't believe there's any approvals tonight.
We will not take 3 hours on the 25th.
We might take 3 hours on the 25th. No. So next Tuesday on the 25th will be when this budget is actually approved. And, in the meantime, if there's any questions or things you're more curious about, you're welcome to ask. And if you have any questions right now, that'd be great. Let's see if we can get to 9 p.m.
Most of the ones I sent some over today. Most of them were answered. The only one that I still have a little asterisk by, and you can follow up after, is sort of the counseling, mental health, social emotional learning. I know that in the Levy presentation, it was talking about how many counselors and psychologists are funded. So I was just curious what that looks like next year versus last year. Are the ratios still the same? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, good question. So our staffing, as far as again, talking about counselors, psychologists, is the staffing on more of what could be considered like the social emotional learning side is staying approximately the same. I think we said that there was going to be a 1.7 increase, 1.7 FTE increase going into this next year. For me, that's a nominal increase. I would say it's pretty much the same. But what we have done is we've started separating out specific funding for specific programs on the SEL side. And so, for example, the district was participating in like some suicide prevention awareness type nights, right? And so it's like, okay, let's create a separate budget. So we sort of memorialize the work associated with that separate budget. Day of Champions. Okay, we're going to separate a budget and do work specific for that. So that's one of the things that Chris does an amazing job at, is really scrutinizing prior year data. And because we separately account and code for pretty much everything, when he sees those trends, he annotates for the next budget year. And then he meets with me and we go through top to bottom each subcategory and say, increase, decrease, keep, cut, go on to the next one. So that's where we're seeing increases, is what I would consider not the staffing side, but more of the MSOC level costs associated with sort of our SEL programming, to make sure that they have dedicated budgets that they know are there and can spend from. So they're not having to worry about participating either in a specific program or an event and where that funding is going to come from. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That is true. So we also have state professional development dollars that come in. So the state funds us for, well, to say they fund us, they don't fully fund us, but the state funds 3 days of training for prototypically staffed teachers. And every year, one of the 3 days are associated with a specific category called out in RCW. I believe this year is cultural responsive teaching. And that day is occurring in August, the 26th. And so the teaching and learning team does a ton of work making sure that that training is really in-depth. It's going to meet all of the RCW requirements. The staff are present, all of those pieces. We set aside funding to offset costs associated with that. So next year, the state mandated day won't be culturally responsive teaching, but that doesn't mean that the staff don't get training on that. It's just not the funded day by the state.
And it's kind of the same question I asked, I think, last year. Why aren't we suing the state?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, with board action, I can do a lot of things. But Chuck, that has come up quite a bit, especially in these legislative meetings that we've been at.
Yeah, it seems to be the only thing that works.
Although I would not consider McCleary working, Chuck.
Well, it did for a while. It made an impact.
It did initially.
Yeah.
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 There is discussion at
Yeah.
the University of Washington SUPS that we are part of
Yeah.
about what that could look like and what class action looks like. That would not be just done with, that wouldn't just be done with WASA members. It would have to be a coalition of, teacher union, PSC,
Yeah.
like it would be all hands on deck. So, but that has been a conversation at the state level.
Yeah. We've got to do something.
Yeah, agreed.
Just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
Is the fact that, as long as I can remember, this district, middle school sports has been intramural?
Uh-huh.
Is the reason for that, is it driven by the transportation budget?
Not necessarily the transportation budget. There's multiple things at play with that. Wendy did have one, we'd have to find a league that's within driving distance of us, that has middle schools participating right now in athletics. Unfortunately, one of the things that a lot of school districts are actually cutting right now is middle school athletics, especially cutting anything but a varsity team at that level. So she did work with some other districts who may be interested in combining and doing that. It's not the transportation budget, it's the availability of transportation that has become a hurdle. Because although I can find the money to cover our drivers getting in school buses and driving kids to an event, our issue is I don't have enough drivers at one given time to cover the from transportation, taking them home, and taking kids to an athletic event at the middle school level, as well as all of the high school transportation. One of the things that we saw a huge increase, and you guys will end up seeing it during our year-end financial statement report, is a significant increase in contracted services for transportation. So charters, you want to talk about a good market to be working in right now, charter school buses, and I'm not talking about luxury coaches. I'm talking about a bus that rolls up. I passed one yesterday with my 15-year-old son in the car, and I won't put his name out there, but he said, "Is that a prison bus?" I said, "No." Yes, yeah. And mind you, the seats, the seat leather that was next to the window was all worn down, so you could see that it was plywood and everything. I said, "No, that's a charter bus." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." So a district would contract with that, and then they would transport kids to and from. And he goes, "It looks like a prison bus." But the nature is that districts are hurting for drivers just across the state and nationwide. COVID had a significant impact on that field. And so we just don't have enough drivers at any given point to really move forward with that. Now, with that being said, that is not something that we have taken off the table. We are going to continue evaluating it. We are going to continue looking at it. It's not cost prohibitive. So I don't want people thinking that it's that issue. It's getting, even if we have the money to pay for the $500,000 in charter buses, I have to get them to actually show up when they've taken a route and actually pick up the kids. But if they get a higher paying job in a neighboring district, they'll either no show or cancel on us and take the higher paying job. And we see that, and our coaches know, they deal with it all the time. And so it is something that we are working through right now, but starting that entire program with a reliance on charters is not going to end well for us. So we're working for other solutions.
Thank you all. That was outstanding.
you.
And I know it's a really long time. Do we want to take a couple minute break, or you want to just push through? Good? Just push through? Okay, thank you all. And I think, I'm just going to call for speaking, so. Is maybe the most important part of what we do as a board. So everything that we do is aligned to that budget. So we're so grateful for a team like yours. Okay. So being this the preliminary budget hearing for the 26-27 school district, I will now call for public comment on the budget, proposed budget, and I'm required to do it 3 times. So at this time, is there anyone who would like to speak on the proposed budget? That's 1. At this point, is there anyone who would like to provide comments on the proposed budget? You. Okay, and one final call. Are there any final comments on the proposed budget before we close this hearing? Okay, that's 3. So seeing none, I will now close the public hearing for the 26-27 budget. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we're moving on to item 6 for the evening. This is our consent agenda. Again, I just want to remind the public that when we vote on this, we're not going to go through and discuss each item unless we pull it out specifically. These are just routine and recurring business items. So oftentimes it's contracts that we're approving, travel for students, and general consent agenda minutes, things like that. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
It's been moved by David and seconded by Lori to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. Consent agenda has been approved. Okay, moving on to our discussion and action items of the evening. Item 7.1 is a review of the first reading of policy 3246. We're not taking any action on this tonight. Again, it's the first read. But this is our policy related to restraint and isolation. Again, these are all items that are in the agenda. They're published, and we have the changes available for the public to read. Also, the board gets this several days to a week in advance, and we all have an opportunity to review the changes, to ask our questions, but just so that we are being very clear with the public, this is a change that is intended to keep the district up to date with current laws. And there's there's a procedure that accompanies. So Julie, do you have just a moment to talk about that? So Julie and Gianna specifically have been working through the accompanying procedure. So the board adopts the policy, and then the superintendent directs her staff to create procedures that align with that. So this change in policy really, like I said, is just to update with current state law, pulls out some pretty specific items that says, restraint and isolation can be used only when reasonably necessary to address threats of imminent harm, and that there will be an accompanying procedure. So if you just want to briefly talk about what that looks like.
Sorry, sure. So this is a policy update recommended by WASDA. Our last policy was, I believe, from 2002. So there's been some policy updates that we've missed as a board, but this is one that is most recently adopted by WASDA. It's recommended because in June, House Bill 1795 was passed, and WASDA then adopted new language to comply with recommendations regarding that House bill. The primary changes have to do with the removal of language in the previous policy that had to do with reasonable force. That's been removed. This is only about isolation and restraint now, this policy. The accompanying procedures will be in alignment with what WASDA has recommended for us. We are reviewing those right now so that we would be ready after the second read to update those. When the law changed in June, it changed effective June 11th. On June 1st, we already reviewed it with our principals and have updated our procedures as far as in compliance with that. We were already largely complying with the recommendations to limit the use of isolation or restraint and to ensure that we were following along with our recommended practice of documenting that through a district form, contacting parents, and monitoring that students were not experiencing isolation or restraint for excessive amount of time. So this recommendation for the board to adopt this updated policy is so that we have the most current policy that is going to be in alignment with the most current procedures. We will be updating our procedures to be in alignment with the recommendations, but we like when our board policies reflect the most recent WASDA recommendation.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you so
Julie.
much.
Any discussion on the review of this policy before we move on? Item 7.2 is the approval of the second reading of policy 1005. This is key functions of the board, so we will be voting on these changes tonight. Again, these are updated updated policy language from WASDA, recommended by WASDA as we're going through our 1000 series. The series really has to do with board operations. And Jenny, thank you, has been including these the language changes are here, or the intent of the change for our public to see so that you are familiar with what we're doing. And again, this is just a policy that was older and is now being rewritten, kind of reframing from function of the board to more board governance role. Has some language in there about annual self-reflection and board development, which we do anyway. So is there a motion to approve the second read of Policy 1005, Key Functions of the Board?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion prior to the vote? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of Policy 1005 has been approved. Okay. The next one is item 7.3, the approval of the second read of Policy 1110 related to elections. Actually, we're going to do this a little bit differently. Let's, Jenny, is this an appropriate time to do it? Just to make sure we're going to move and second to get it on the discussion, then we'll discuss it first. Okay, so we're going to change up how we're doing this a little bit. Before we have a discussion about an item that we're voting on, we're going to move second. Okay. Okay. It's been moved by Chuck and seconded by Lori to approve the second read of Policy 1110 related to elections. So discussion. This policy, again, it's on the agenda. You can see the changes there, but really this is not a significant change. It just has more to do with bringing the policy into compliance with current statutory election process, some dates, and filling gaps in, dates. Sorry, I can't read that from here. I'm fumbling. I have my notes. Largely bringing the policy into compliance with the current election statutory process and filling in some gaps around unusual election circumstances. So, for example, if there's a special election, those dates and the changes, we just follow the state process for that. Any other discussion? Sorry, that was not clean. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1110, election, has been approved. Item 7.4 is the approval of the second reading of policy 1112, director orientation. Thank you. Okay, is there a second? Okay. It's been moved by Chuck and seconded by Lori. Discussion is that this is a new policy that we didn't have before, or we'll open the discussion with this, saying it's about acclimatizing new board members to the role of the job. So it's really a process by which we are saying we will go over budgets, handbooks, bargains, meetings, that type of stuff. Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1112, director orientation, has been approved. Item 7.5 is the approval of the second read of policy 1113, board director residency. Is there a motion to put this on the table to discuss?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Matt and seconded by David. Discussion, again, this is a new policy for us, as recommended by WASDA. We didn't have this. It defines residencies and what happens if we move. So for example, if we move out of our district area, you may continue out your term as long as you live within the district boundaries for the rest of that term, for example. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1113, board director residency, has been approved. Item 7.6 is the approval of the second read of policy 1210, annual organizational meeting. Is there a motion to put this on the table to discuss? It's been moved by Lori and seconded by Chuck. Discussion prior to the vote. 1210 just really changes this around from the election of officers to how we reorganize the meeting. So it's changing the name from election of officers to the annual organizational meeting, clarifies when that meeting occurs, what happens with the newly elected and appointed board members, and how we address vacancies. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1210 has been approved. Okay, the next one is policy 1220, board officers and duties of board members. Is there a motion to approve the second read?
I'll move that we approve second reading of 1220.
Okay, it's been moved by David and seconded by Lori. Just a brief background, again, it's listed on the agenda, but this is just clarifying that the board chair, president, or another board designee may participate as the board WASDA Legislative Assembly, clarifying that the legislative representative should obtain the board's support for legislative proposals before submitting a vote, I guess, during the assembly, which is coming up, so it's important that we have this in time for that, and some other minor wording and grammar edits. Any other discussion or questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1220, board officers and duties of board members, has been approved. Item 7.8 is approval of the second read of policy 1310, policy adoption, manuals, and administrative procedures. Is there a motion to approve the second read of policy 1310?
So moved.
Is there a second? Been moved by David and seconded by Matt. Discussion, again, this is not a super substantive change, it's just policy interpretation language. It's coming from the House 2025 Legislative House Bill 1296, which established a statewide policy that school district policies and procedures must, to the fullest extent possible, prioritize student safety, essentially. So again, this is, bottom line, is primarily a legal update and provides guidance on governance clarification and how the district operates. Any other questions or Discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried, and the second read of policy 1310 has been approved. Okay, we're getting there. Item 7.9 is the approval of the adoption of the second read of policy 1821, standards for individual school directors. Is there, thanks, Chuck. Is there a second? Okay. It's been moved by Chuck and seconded by Matt. A little background again, this is about, if 1005 was about how the board functions as a governing body, 1821 really discusses how board members are expected to conduct themselves as individuals. So it addresses things like values and behavior, leadership, communication, and commitment to educational equity. So any other questions or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is carried, and the adoption of the second read of policy 1821 has been approved. That takes us to the end of our business for the evening, so I will turn it over to the superintendent for your report.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the fiscal team there. I think the trifecta, you did a great job and you answered questions, and very appreciative and very in-depth. So thank you for your hard work. There's so many hours that go behind all of those numbers. And I am in awe of the work that you do together. And Logan, welcome back. You do have to go back to college, though. You're only a sophomore.
Oh, no. What a way to go out. We're going to keep you till the very end.
I know. All right. So good evening. We are preparing for an incredible 26-27 school year. It's really been a wonderful administrative retreat over the last 2 weeks. We recently welcomed back our administrators. We spent our time together grounded in our mission and focusing on MTSS, literacy, mathematics, leadership, and the launch of our new AI studio. And the work that was done was pretty profound. Our administrators are really learning how to problem solve in amazing ways. I'm really proud of this team's commitment to inspiring and empowering every student every day. I just wanted to mention, and I know it's late, but last month, 2 of our student board representatives, Sophia Fenn from Gig Harbor and Kainoa Coit from Peninsula, who I saw today, and he was bringing students all around because we had the Seahawks Day, Seahawks 101, and we also had the comparable Gig Harbor Tide Amazing Day, whatever they call it, represented. But both of them represented the entire state of Washington at the Day of AI Festival at MIT and University of Massachusetts. They sat in the Senate chamber and they collaborated with peers. I know that you saw hopefully some pictures, but we can't wait to get them back. They will be part of my kickoff. This year, instead of gathering everyone together, we are giving the gift of time so that our staff have time to really look at their curriculum updates. They can work together with their groups. But I know that both, I'm pretty sure, Sophia and Kainoa, I'm looking at Michael. Just Kainoa, okay. They're both on the video? Okay, but I look forward to having them come and talk about their experience. Very honored to have Peninsula School District represent the state of Washington, and I know those 2 did a great job. We had the opportunity to talk to Tori and Bob Marshall as adults, and what they said was that they were so honored to be there, first of all, and they learned so much, but that our kids really represented so well. So that's a testament to their families and our school district. As we enter this school year, we are committed to being future ready. You will hear a lot of that. Keeping relationships and human judgment at the center of everything that we do, whether we talk about AI or we talk about mathematics, or we talk about literacy, or we talk about athletics. We can't wait to welcome our staff and students back, and we really hope that they enjoy and soak up the sun and the fun until, I mean, it's right around the corner. We've got about 2 weeks from tomorrow? 2 weeks from tomorrow. So enjoy. For those of you that are releasing your students into that college experience, I have been around more parents that have that empty nest moment. And so that's really what it's all about, that kids can go off and be successful and that they can feel positive about their next step. And that's really what you all do as a board, asking questions, but also making decisions so that our students have a really wonderful future. So thank you for that.
Right. Vacation's almost over. All right, we will move on to board discussion and comments. So, is there a time? Who would like to start? Okay.
I'll echo Creston and a shout out and kudos to the finance team, dealing with all of our questions, presenting for practically 3 hours, standing the whole time. Very impressive. And thank you for doing that. I don't know if anybody is watching the recording at this point, but I've been encouraging people since it's been on the agenda the last 2 times to read policy 1005. I think it really does a good job of explaining what the school board actually does, what our role is, what we have say over, what we impact. So I think that's really helpful, not just for me to understand, but for people that, come to us with questions and whatnot. I think it's very helpful to have that clarity in the forefront recently. So I've been pushing that to people.
Just note that I have had occasion to be in or at a couple of our buildings the last few weeks, and they're looking fantastic. Just everything from, new painted new stripes in the parking lot to the new floor inside Gig Harbor, new logo where it was kind of coming up. And so it's always gets you excited for the start of school because everything's just looking good.
Keep it short. I do have a couple of things. I am one of those empty nesters now. Julie and I are sending the kids off. I'm sending my youngest off to college and then welcoming my niece into kindergarten. So it is a really full circle moment. So that's nice. Thank you to the finance team again, like everyone else had said. Next week, our board meeting will be a budget-focused meeting specifically to hopefully approve this budget. I know that we need to do that before we can move forward and spend that money. That will be another important one. So if you have questions, please send them through over the course of this next week. Just a quick announcement about a partnership with PSEF. They're doing a fundraiser for our Aviation Academy students next Wednesday night at the Aero Museum. I had the opportunity to attend the Museum of Flight's 10th anniversary for their Aeronautical Science Pathways event last weekend, and the Peninsula School District was given a shout out. I wasn't there representing, I was there as a +1 that night, but they spoke about the Peninsula School District and how great it was that we were so eager to pursue that pathway. And from that, I think there are now 5 other school districts in the state that they've partnered with, but everyone kind of sits back to watch what we're doing and if we're successful, and then they jump on it. So that's just another indicator of us being a leader in that field. So that was really cool. But the speaker series is going to feature a YouTuber. I guess he's got over 1 million followers. His name is Captain Steve with, I guess, 4 E's in the name. So he'll be coming to speak along with the Director of Talent Acquisition for Alaska Airlines and then the CEO of Horizon Airlines. So anyone who's focused on the aviation industry, it would be a great place to go see that. So thank you to PSEF for running that for us. Quickly mention that we had our board summer retreat last week. And I just want to thank everyone for time. I know Lori wasn't able to be there for other reasons, and certainly understand. But it's always great for us to reset and recognize that as with our different priorities personally, we all have priorities for our students to be in the best school district in the state and for them to thrive and learn and achieve. So more to come on that with our goals that we brought forth from that event. And then lastly, just a quick mention of General Assembly. I know that we will meet again before that, but General Assembly for WASDA will be on September 19th. I think, David, you're going to be the voting delegate. Anyone else can join. I can't vote because I will be there administering it as the resolutions person. But that's another important thing that we do. So I think everyone got the Assembly handbook. If you would read through it, and then like our policy says, we have to agree on all of the action that we take. So if you have any opposition to, I would say anything that goes against what the resolution or the legislative committees have determined as a pass or do not pass recommendation, we need to bring those up for discussion in our, I guess it's gonna have to be next week, honestly, because our September meeting comes after, right? Jenny, do you have the date of the September board meeting?
22nd.
Yeah, so if we have any changes to the pass or do not pass recommendations, we have to discuss them next week. Okay, and so our next board meeting will be here, the 25th, specifically for budget, but I guess if there's a General Assembly discussion, we'll do that as well. August 25th at 6:00 p.m. And at 9:31, we are now adjourned.